Hey, so I didn't hear the music just then, but hopefully y'all did. Welcome to this week's episode of All the Way Down. This is episode 17. I'm Invictus Knox. We have Mr.
Dash Retro.
We got Dash Retro here. How y'all doing?
Mr. Final Fantasy, they call me. Dash Mr. Final Fantasy Retro.
Mr., huh?
Well,
No, we're not talking
some
about the
call me
Mr.
Mrs.,
Project.
you know.
Okay, yeah. So we're just going. Gotcha. All right. So, you are guru with Final Fantasy? I was not aware.
I have played a lot of Final Fantasy. So, well, it was a thing. It was kind of a Twitch thing at first. So growing up, I played Final Fantasy 7. That was my game. That was my jam.
Me
Played
too.
tons of 7. Also liked Tactics a lot growing up. So that was also on PS1. What about you, though? You said you also played a lot of 7?
I played a lot of 7. I have a weird intro to Final Fantasy. My first, because I grew up poor, my only games were demo discs, basically. And I got this game called Final Fantasy, and then whatever the fuck that Roman numeral was. And it was the opening mission that you get after you get out of the Seed Academy of Final Fantasy VIII, where it's this beautiful, like, almost D-Day-esque storming of a beachhead on this really cool, like, hydrofoil futuristic boat. It's I'm gonna damn it. It's Squall, Zell, and Rinoa. And then that one Cypher, the guy with a fucking not scar. Yeah, okay. So you're with him. He's doing the same thing that you get basically with Auron in Final Fantasy X, same character. And then for some reason, at that early on in the game, Rinoa has a summon called Leviathan, and Leviathan is this. I went from a Sega Genesis to a PS1. I saw this on a demo disc, and I said, oh my god, I need Final Fantasy. Because Leviathan comes out, just this beautiful, like, sky blue, just ocean waves are going everywhere. It creates this giant rock waterfall, and water just goes all the way across the battlefield, damaging all in its wake. It's like a tsunami attack. And I was like, oh my god, imagine if, like, the surf move in Pokemon looked like that, because in yellow version, that's basically what the attack was, except this had a giant fucking dragon in it. It was pretty as fuck. It was shiny. I was like, I need Final Fantasy. So I go to the store, and I go, I want Final Fantasy Roman numeral. I didn't say that, but, you know, I'm looking for Final Fantasy game. And then the GameStop employee goes, oh, this is what you need right here. This is great. And I go, oh, this is the Final Fantasy game? I was like, yeah, this is what you need. It's Final Fantasy 7. So I bought Final Fantasy 7 unknowingly. So I may have been the only person to do that I know. Because everyone else, you know, Final Fantasy 7 is like the most popular one ever, basically. And everyone knows that game. So I get through it. I'm immediately disappointed by the graphics, but, you know, I'll get into that later. This is my experience. I beat Final Fantasy VII. I play no other Final Fantasy later until 10, and I think I didn't beat it. I think I got so close to beating it, but I didn't have the interest in beating it. And then I think, except for Tactics on PS1, which I did play and I wanted to love, but I was bad at it. Aside from that, and eventually Final Fantasy 1 and 2, 5 minutes of each for Game Boy Advance, Dawn of Souls. That is my Final Fantasy experience of my entire life pre-streaming. So,
Yeah, gotcha. Right. So for me growing up, I feel like I don't even know if I heard of the games before 7. I'm not even sure. But at some point when we had a PS1, my brother heard of the game somehow. I don't know where he heard it from or something, but he asked for it as a gift, you know, for Christmas or something, right? And he got it. So thanks to my brother, you know, knowing about this game and asking for it, and then our parents getting it for us, boom, I had Final Fantasy VII for PS1. And the funny thing was, I believe this was before I had a memory card, though.
oh no.
Because, you know, we played, like, Crash Bandicoot and stuff, and games where, like, it didn't really matter that you started a new game every time.
Uh,
But, yeah, I remember starting a new game in Final Fantasy VII, like, every day. and playing, meeting
Jeez.
Eris and doing all that. But I loved it. It's funny how kids are, because I just like nothing was really wrong to me. I just about that experience. I just loved it.
See, that would
Um,
bother me immensely. For some, okay, maybe it's just the little kid in me who only had demo discs and not the ability to actually play any game to completion. Hearing you say, "Well, I had the whole game, but I didn't fucking play that. I didn't want to. I just kept starting it over and over again." Me as a kid would
well,
have been like, "Ah."
if you're a demo guy, then you at least understand the idea of playing this just one little section of the
Exactly,
game
it's the
over and
same
over.
thing. It's just I
Hmm.
guess maybe it's just the fact that you choose that. Well, I don't know if you chose to not have a memory card. When you're a kid, you get what you
Right,
get.
right. Yeah, so then I got a memory card at some point, and
Yeah.
I played through Final Fantasy 7, and it was great. And we had tactics at some point also, which was pretty hard for me. I think when I was a kid, I never actually beat it, but my brother beat it. And I remember like that game's soundtrack is like really special to me, because my brother got like into tactics, where I mean, there were just hours and hours and days and weeks of me sitting on the couch in our basement playing like Game Boy or something, while my brother was next to me playing tactics. So I just heard that soundtrack just so much, of him just always playing hours and hours of tactics next to me. Um, so yeah, so that soundtrack kind of takes me back. But yeah, that was it. At some point, I think I did borrow that you mentioned Dawn of Souls, it was called, I
Yeah.
think, for Game Boy Advance. I did play through Final Fantasy 1 on that at some point, probably when I was like 12 or 13, I think. And that was it, right? That was my whole Final Fantasy experience. But I always heard that like the old ones were good.
Well, see, that's
Uh,
how far did you said you beat one in Dawn of Souls?
yeah.
I think at the
It
time I
was
just must have been a graphics snob or something because I could not get through it. But it was also the fact that it's such early Final Fantasy mechanics, and I was never prepared for that.
Yeah, yeah. So I love that shit, and we will get into that, because so that was Final Fantasy to me for the longest time. And I saw a couple others, like I saw bits and pieces of 10, but I always kind of saw 10 in the context of like people hate it or people love it, right? And then like 13 came out at some point and was a joke, and then
Yeah.
like uh and then so it was after that though that it was like, all right, you know what? I've heard that the old ones are good. I like retro games. I like JRPGs, right? There's no way that I won't have a great time if I play through these. And so I said, I'm going to play through the first 6 Final Fantasy games. And we're doing the original versions, right? Famicom, or I'll play the first one on NES, 2 and 3 on Famicom, but with fan translations, right? 4 and 6 were on Super Nintendo, and then 5 Super Famicom with the fan translation.
Mm.
And I set out to do it, and I did it, and it was great.
Did you
So where the
find
hmm
Final Fantasy 1 and 2? Did you, maybe it's just the fact that I played them on the Game Boy, original Game Boy, no backlight, Game Boy Advance, the first one. Did you find on Super Famicom or NES, whatever you did, 1 and 2, more playable? Like, were they easier to get through as not a handheld version?
Probably not. I mean, I
Really?
played the Game Boy Advance one when I was, like 12. So I don't know how well I can compare them. I definitely remember the graphics being better on Game Boy Advance, and you could probably save anywhere on the world map,
Huh.
which, might have on Game Boy Advance, that is,
Quality of
you could
life
probably
improvements,
yeah, you could probably save anywhere, which makes like a huge difference, right?
for sure.
So yeah, I mean, like here's kind of the thing about this podcast so far, is that I feel like today I'm going in and I want to say, hey, you know what I've been playing lately? Final Fantasy X too, and I want to talk about it. However, there's like 3 years of history that I got to tell you guys about that leads up to this.
We need
Uh,
context, so go ahead.
Right. So, yeah, so I played Final Fantasy 1 on NES. Let's talk about it briefly. That game is archaic, but it's awesome. So the big thing about Final Fantasy 1 is that the very first thing that you do is you choose your party members. You choose what job everyone is going to be, and you give them names, which immediately says this game has replay value
Oh yeah,
because you can do like I'm gonna do a all thieves run. I'm gonna do a all or like a
healers
all
run.
mages run or that kind of
Yeah,
thing. Yeah, yeah. I went with a pretty balanced party. I had a warrior, a fighter, a white mage, and a black mage, and so I love that about it because I love job systems, right? And so giving you the job system, it's not the kind of job system where you can swap jobs or anything like that. You just pick them at the start, right? And the thing about the game is it is archaic and kind of slow because when you get into a fight, uh, it takes forever to tell you what happens. It'll say it has to like the NES, the game looks really good for an NES game, but at the cost of like it taking time to draw everything. Like when you get into a battle, the enemies are in like a window and your party is in a window, and then there are several windows on the bottom that
yeah.
tell you the status of everybody. Or on the right is the status, but on the bottom there are several windows that tell you the status of the battle. So like there's a window that tells you what the names of the enemies are. But when you attack someone, it like draws a window that types out they attack. Then it draws a window that says hit twice. Then it draws a window that says you did 20 damage. Then it draws a window that says terminated, right?
This
And
seems
so
like the same thing that or Might and Magic does on the Sega Genesis, where its main focus. I'm looking at the art now, like a picture of screen or gameplay, and it looks like it's definitely focused on the sprite work more than anything else visually, because every
yeah.
like environments are just a repeated tile. And there's not much put into them, and it's all about the amount of sprites on the screen that can be rendered, I guess, and then what all it's doing. But the whole pop-up phenomenon seems like it's part of that. Like it's coming out of the age of old school PC RPGs. It seems like
Yeah, yeah. And the biggest thing about it is just that it takes time for the NES to draw those windows,
that's
every
impressive.
single turn. It looks good, but it slows the battles way down. So I think a lot of people might pick up this game and be instantly frustrated by how long it takes to get through a battle just because of how long it takes to give you the information.
It's just weird because like
Um,
it's not drawing a whole lot on the screen as far as I can see. Why do you think it has to take so long to draw a window?
I'm talking about every time that a turn happens on the
Yeah.
bottom of the screen, it kind of writes them all out, one at a time.
Oh, you're
They
talking about
attack,
like the
it
actual
hits,
text of it happening.
damage.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. But the thing is, I love the battle system because it is one of those battle systems where your party's on one side, they look okay. Then the enemies are on the other side, they look fucking awesome. Like
Yeah,
as far as sprite work goes, they look
definitely.
incredible. And then it has you choose everybody's action before anything happens, right? It has you one by one, you choose what every single party member is going to do and who they're going to target, and then everything plays out, right? First, an enemy goes because they're the fastest. Then this character goes. Then that guy goes. Then that guy goes. This guy dies, and it all goes until everybody's had their turn. And then you repeat. Then, you choose everybody's actions again. And I really, really like that system because it's super tactical, I feel like. Just like planning out the best moves and thinking ahead. Things like, well, nobody's dead or nobody's really hurt right now, but there's a lot of enemies and my white mage is slow. So if I just cast a healing spell with the white mage, even though everyone's at full health, it's probably not going to go off until the later part of the round because she's slow, and people will probably be damaged and get healed by it. And you have to make decisions like that, which I love. So I just loved the battle system. One other quirk about it that I think might frustrate a lot of people is that in a lot of RPGs, you can just mash A to just say attack, 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 attack. Okay, they're all gonna attack, right? Except in Final Fantasy 1, it queues up everybody's attacks on that first guy. And normally in other games, once that guy's dead, they'll start attacking the next guy, you know? But not this game. If the first guy hits and kills the enemy, the rest of the three people will swing at the empty space and miss.
Oh,
So
so they don't even auto target another enemy.
right. So
Oh,
you have to like actually plan your attacks out like, okay, so
huh.
these guys are my hard hitters and but then there's the mages and I'm not going to waste their MP. They're just going to attack, right? So I need to distribute my attacks where it's like, okay, I'll team the warrior up with the black mage and they'll both attack this guy and then the fighter and the white mage will both attack this guy so it evenly spreads the damage and we don't get that problem, you know? And like you got to make decisions like that, right? And so it really especially feels like this kind of sounds weird, but like it almost makes the repetition of the battles better because you start to figure out how to most efficiently deal with certain
Oh, okay.
layouts of enemies, you know?
Yeah.
Because, yeah, you might get like, oh, here's the battle again that's like this guy and three wolves, you know? But now you know from doing that battle already a couple times, like, well, this guy's got about this much health, so he can take about this many hits from this character, and so we're only going to queue up that many, you know, and so you start to get better at it.
I feel like I'm
Love all that.
immediately seeing a game that just fills the world with quote unquote video game boomers, where people get used to doing all of the motions to plan this shit out, to where then like Final Fantasy 4 comes out and these people are already like, this is bullshit. You know,
Yeah.
you
Yeah, yeah,
stupid
yeah.
kids.
Like, we'll get to this a little bit more in a minute, but I mean, let's say up front that my biggest complaint about Final Fantasy VII, which is the one I'm super nostalgic for and grew up with and I absolutely love, but my biggest complaint is that you can just hold circle to beat all the battles, you know? Like not literally all of them, but like so much of that game is way too easy and you can just hold down the circle button to automatically select attack really fast and you just attack everything and win. Because, you know, looking at these old games, it's like you had to put so much thought into every action,
Yeah.
and
I,
into
it,
every
it's
random battle and stuff.
it's like a cool, I don't want to go too far off on this tangent, but it's like a cool thing that you notice where the older and more technologically limited a game is, the more there's just this overhead narrative that they feed you and they expect you to pay attention to, because nothing else is going to give you those clues unless you just keep reading and keep the context of the situation. Like you talking about all this is probably why I got in one battle and then quit Final Fantasy 1 after I was so
Hmm.
used to 7 and actually I wanted to play 8. But yeah, it's mechanics wise, man.
Yeah. So, but let's get into exploration, right? So it's also got a big open world that you walk around in. And now you say the world is open. Well, yeah, it is. So you get into this open world and you're supposed to, you know, figure out what to do. So biggest thing in JRPGs, there's little towns that you go into and you got to talk to all the people. And I have pages and pages of notes where I wrote down every single
Whoa.
thing that every single NPC said, you know? And it comes in handy because then well, let's get into that in a minute. Firstly, it, you get into a couple more weird archaic mechanics. Like in this game, the only way to save the game is to sleep at an inn. It's not like more modern RPGs where there's save points and
And
then
ends.
also, yeah, and then also you can save anywhere on the world map. This game is only the inns, so you got to go
Mm.
back to town to save your game. And then there's little things like when you go into shops, you can only buy items one at a time for no reason.
What?
So like, yeah, so like if you want to buy like a lot of potions, you have to just sit there and mash A for like, you
Oh.
know, 10 minutes. So that's a little shitty. But but yeah, stuff like, you know, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think that the inn even heals you. I think it's just to
Oh
save.
god, you don't even rest?
I think that there is a separate facility for healing and reviving, and all that. So yeah, it's got some old school stuff like that in it. But here's the best part of exploration, right? Here's where we get into the real meat and potatoes of what makes the first 3 Final Fantasies specifically so good. Is that so you go out into the world, you're fighting dudes as you traverse, the plains and the forests, and maybe you go sailing once you get a boat and all that. But at some point you find a dungeon. And there's a boss at the end of the dungeon, right? And this is your thing right now. You are supposed to go through this dungeon and beat the boss at the end of it to progress the plot, right? This is the best shit ever because, like I said, there's no save points mid battle, which
Oh,
means that there's also, or sorry, no, mid dungeon, because they're only at inns. That also means that there's no tents. Well, there are tents, but you can only use them on the world map, not in the dungeons, because there's not a save point to use them at.
that's what I was gonna say. But tents don't count as save points in this game, right?
Right.
Just for healing. Okay.
Yeah, they just heal you. I think, you know, I'm not 100% on that detail now that you ask it. You might be able to save if you use a tent on the world map. I don't quite remember.
Yeah, that's
But
just how they used to do it.
point is you can't use it mid dungeon at those save
Yeah.
points that they added mid dungeon in later games and in every RPG since. So what that creates is this dungeon crawling experience where first you go into the dungeon and you kind of get your ass kicked at first because all the enemies are new and you don't know how to deal with all the battles at first. There's traps in the dungeons, there's like floors that hurt you and that kind of thing that maybe you need to deal with sometimes and those kinds of hazards. And then also, you got to be really thorough. Like you're searching every nook and cranny to find every chest that you can, entering every single room. So you're getting into a lot of encounters because you're looking around a lot. So at some point, you have to make the decision like, once you get to, a little bit over maybe half or maybe a little bit under half your MP, you got to leave because you won't be able to get back out of the dungeon alive if you
You gotta
go any
track
deeper,
plan your steps too.
Yeah. So it's like you can get just this deep in and then you have to leave and go rest up and probably save your game just to be sure, right? But then the next time you go in, you're a little bit stronger because you've leveled up a little bit. You're a little bit more familiar with the battles. It sound like okay, what I'm getting at is originally it sounds like well, leveling up is the only thing that gets you stronger. So you're just beating your head against the wall until it eventually falls down, right? Like you're just going a little bit further into the dungeon each time as you level up. Nah, it happens way faster than that because you leveled up a little bit, but also you got that knowledge about the encounters that I was talking about earlier. Also, you've already looked in a whole bunch of the rooms, you've already grabbed a bunch of the chests, so you don't have to thoroughly explore all of the dungeon anymore. You can just beeline straight to where you left off. And so that lets you get a lot further into the dungeon on your second try,
Yeah.
And that exact like gameplay loop I just love, getting a little bit further and then oh shit, we need to hold off, we need to go back, heal up, save, go back in and get a little bit further,
Hmm.
especially because once you get to where you think it's the end, at some point you're like, I think the boss is behind that door because it looks real fancy. Then you get that like final risk reward of like, do we pull out and save one more time or do we think we can do it right now? And I just love that shit, Uh, and I think that experience has been ruined by the introduction of mid-dungeon save points that not only let you save to break all the tension, but also they let you, most of the time at save points you can use like a tent or something. So now you're fully healed and saved in the middle of the dungeon. I think it ruins that tension. But so that's Final Fantasy 1. The other thing you get into I was talking about exploration earlier, writing everything down, right? So the dungeons are like the big progress points, right? But then also you need to know where they are and what you can do in the world. So a lot of the game is getting to each different town and talking to all the townsfolks. And if you can remember what everyone says, or you wrote it down like I did, everything like comes together. People are saying you, oh, the prince is sleeping, but if only he had an elf herb, And then you're like, all right, and you write that down. And then someone else says something about pirate ships or something, and you write that down, right? But then later, when that prince is sleeping, you're like, oh shit, I know what he needs. That elf herb. Oh, the one that I got in the dungeon. Boom, and like that kind of stuff. And when you make all the connections and get the progress through the story, it's just a fucking video game, man. I love it.
You are
So,
the complete opposite person of me in this regard. I don't see how anyone has like I brought up Might and Magic earlier. I played that first because it was the first game I physically got when I was recollecting Sega Genesis. And I was testing out my first Sega Genesis that I kind of bought broken and fixed up. And then I tested the game, and then I played it for like, I want to say 10 minutes before I died and said, okay, this is terrible. But only because it is so in depth with all the things that it makes you keep track of, like what you're talking about. And then I saw our mutual friend Camel play Might and Magic as well. And I saw him writing down his path on graphing paper. And I was like, oh my God, I will never have the patience to care this much about a game to where it's going to make me pull out the school supplies.
hmm So I didn't draw any maps in Final Fantasy, I don't think.
Keeping a
A
journal
couple.
that is not an in-game function journal that just kind of autofills is way beyond me too.
Yeah. See, that is my favorite shit. Like Metroid for NES, I had to draw a map for, and
Oh.
Castlevania 2,
Oh, I
or
didn't draw
like what
anything
was
for
the other big
Castlevania
one?
2.
Oh, it helped a lot, I thought.
Hmm.
But yeah, Metroid was like the biggest one. Or like Zelda 2, or Zelda 1 actually. I drew maps of all the shit.
That's crazy.
Um,
I would just keep it all in my
and yeah.
memory.
I've I I I just like drawing it. A lot of it is part of it. But also I don't know. I don't trust my memory that much cuz like it's a little bit of a tangent, but like with Metroid, growing up I never could get into NES Metroid. Even though that Metroid overall was one of my favorite series, I could never get into the first one. And it was because I was just lost all the time, and by the time you find the missiles, you're like, "Oh my god, there's like 100 places that I saw that I needed missiles. I don't know where to start."
This is
If you
exactly
just
why I didn't get through Metroid 2 Return of Samus on Game Boy. There was no map function at all, so I never knew where the fuck to go.
Right. So if you just draw a map though, by the time you get those missiles, you realize, "Oh, there's only 2 places to go actually. And they're exactly here and here. Let's go." Boom, completely different experience. It turns out that the 100 places to go was you finding the same 2 things over and over again, alternating by accident, because you didn't draw a fucking map. So yeah, there you go. So anyway, yeah, love that old shit. So then Final Fantasy 2 comes out. That one was a little rougher, but I still really really enjoyed it. The really cool things. Okay, so the big thing about Final Fantasy 2 that everyone kind of knows about, I think already, is that game ditched the traditional level up system in favor of like a you use it, you level it up kind of
Oh.
system. So like if you equip a character with swords, they get better with just swords. Same with other weapon types. Also though, things like if your character's HP, their max HP goes up by getting hit, and stuff like that.
Oh.
Uh
I don't
and
like that.
it's I overall kind of liked it. I just had a couple big grievances with it. Overall, I really liked the idea.
It forces
Um
your healer to be weak, though. It forces your magic users to have to be magic users. You're dedicating,
mm,
aren't you?
sort of. In spirit, kind of. Okay, so here's what my experience turned out to be with it. The thing about magic users in like Final Fantasy 1 is that they really often didn't have very much to do, right? Because you don't want to waste all your magic casts
Oh yeah.
on regular fights and that kind of thing. So a lot of the time your black mage is kind of doing nothing. He's just hitting guys for 3
Yeah,
damage
with a little
because you
dagger.
don't want yeah, because you don't want to waste the resources. So in Final Fantasy 2, that turns into something that they're actually leveling up, you know? So you don't even really it ends up kind of ditching the idea of a dedicated magic user
Hmm.
altogether because everyone is using a lot of physical attacks, at least if you played it the way I did. And so what it kind of ended up happening was even though I was using magic and even though I did kind of focus on magic with specific characters, the whole party by the end of the game, they're just all beefcakes, you know? Everyone's got really good physical attacks, everyone's got lots of HP, everyone is super leveled up overall, and so they don't really have very much identity from each other. At least that was my experience, and so that was a little weird. The other problem with it was that so magic spells individually level up. So like in order for your if you have like the spell that increases the character's physical attack, it doesn't do anything at first. You have to like cast it 1,000 times for it to actually like get good.
Oh.
And that system I thought kind of sucked because well first of all, I just ignored it for most of the game. For pretty much the entire game, I completely ignored those types of spells. And then it turned out that at like this is a little spoilery as far as mechanics go, a tiny bit about Final Fantasy 2, but it turned out that very late in the game, it became very, very important that you use those spells, that you use the buff spells. And so I got all the way, using my normal battle strategy, I got all the way to like literally the very last boss of the game. And then at that point, I had to quit and do like a few hours of grinding,
Oh.
of just grinding up these spells. Not even the
Jeez.
characters. I just needed to get these spells leveled up.
Ugh.
And that sucked, right? I'm one big thing about RPGs in general is that I'm kind of anti-grind.
Very much
Uh,
same.
yeah, and the thing is, you don't have to grind in RPGs for the most part. Maybe there's a couple exceptions, especially exceptions at certain times, but for the most part, what happens in RPGs is if you don't grind, you maybe get behind level a little bit, maybe, but if that happens, it just means that the battles are a little harder, and so you need to use more tactics to get through them instead of just tanking it. To me, that's more fun. So it's like by not wasting time grinding, I'm being rewarded by a more thoughtful tactical battle system, you know? And then if you are behind level, then you get more experience from the enemies also. So like you don't get too behind level because it's balanced in a way that catches you up to that minimum, you know?
Hmm.
So that's how I've always seen it is that like you just have more fun if you don't grind. There's been a couple exceptions though, like at the end of Final Fantasy 2 because of this stupid spell system. Had to grind those and I didn't like that a lot. But Final Fantasy 2 did have some nice stuff. The story was pretty good. I really liked the characters and they introduced a new system where like you can use items on the field in order to like advance the plot in certain ways. So instead of it just being a matter of talking to people, and it'll be like if you talk to, you know, if you talk to the guy who wants the bucket while you have the bucket in your inventory, he'll just be like, "Is that a bucket? Give it to me," you know? Instead of that, in Final Fantasy 2, they made it so that you actually have to like opt to open a menu and use an item, right? In order to get those things to happen, which was nice because it meant that you had to think about it a little bit more. You didn't accidentally make progress in Final Fantasy 2. You always knew what you were doing, you know? So that I really liked. Overall, though, one of the weaker ones because of some of those things, but overall, I liked it. I liked it, right? So then we get to 3. 3 is Fucking amazing. It's like the best one.
Huh.
Uh, so 3, they brought back the job system. Well, 3, they introduced the job system proper. So instead of Final Fantasy 1, where you chose jobs at the start and you were locked into them, instead of Final Fantasy 2, where everybody's job is ultimate beefcake, Final Fantasy 3 is the game where you unlock jobs as you play it, and you can change your character's jobs whenever you want. And so you can have your guy be a warrior, and then you switch him to a black mage, and he learns some stuff there, and then you switch him to a samurai, and he learns some stuff, and all that. And then here's the big thing. The big thing about job systems, right, is that they are a job. So they have that move set. Then you equip them also with a secondary move set. So if you've been a white mage for a while, you can switch that character to a black mage, so they have black magic now because they're a black mage, but you also get to equip white magic on them so they can do both. Or you can do something like have a warrior with white magic, or a samurai with black magic, and that kind of thing, or a samurai with the warrior skills. And this, oh, it's so good because it everybody's playthrough is so different,
Yeah.
because everyone latches on to the different jobs and does the combinations differently.
and
And you change them.
having Final Fantasy V being the first Final Fantasy I've ever beaten below 7 recently, I can vouch that without this job system, I would not have beaten that game because I would have not kept coming back. It is very fun to mix and match.
Yeah. And so 3 is the first one to do that. The other very nice thing about 3 is all of that, like pretty much all of that jankiness that I was talking about the first game is fixed in this one. Like, one thing I didn't mention about 1 and like the slow battles is that if you used a move that hit all enemies, it had to tell you one at a time. It hit this one for 54. Close all the windows, open them all up. It hit this one for 54. Close them all up, over and over again. And then sometimes you're fighting 9 dudes at once. Final Fantasy 3 is the first one where when you hit a dude, damage numbers just pop off of them, instead of doing the whole song and dance. And when you hit multiple dudes at once, it shows all of their damage numbers at once. So things go super smooth.
Um, Let me ask this: when there were certain Final Fantasy games that you needed like all materia in Final Fantasy VII to be able to attack a group of enemies. Could you just do that by default in these games?
So in Final Fantasy 1, it was per spell. Like this spell hits one target, this spell hits all targets, and that kind of thing. So there were
Okay.
different spells with different targets. I want to say, I don't remember about 2. I want to say 3 allowed you to pick. Like you could either target an enemy or you could target all, and if you targeted all, it did like a third of the damage or
Yeah.
something like that to
Splits it
all
up,
of
like
them.
divides it up. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, and that one you could just pick, I
Big
think.
fan of that tech. Big fan of being able to just choose all.
Yeah. So 3 overall, I mean, I've talked a lot about that dungeon crawling experience that I like. So, I mean, 3 just has it all. It's got the dungeon crawling I love. It's got that world exploration I love, and the going through towns and talking to people.
What about the
You
story?
get
Does the
you get your
story
boat.
does the story get you like does that involve you in the game, or is it all just the mechanics and kind of the experience of like walking through and playing, like talking to NPCs?
So the first one was all mechanics. I think the
Okay.
second one introduced like this one's got an actual story. There's a thing where it's like at first all 4 of your guys are there, but then one of them gets captured, and it's the brother of one of the people in your party. And then as you go, you get different people kind of cycling in and out of your party in that fourth slot that guy used to be in. Some characters die and all that, and it's all decent. It's nothing like outstanding. I'd
Yeah.
say I'd say for NES standards, it's outstanding, but like by today's story standards, it's just kind of it's enough to keep you going. Here's one thing, actually, I'm really glad you asked this because I bitch about story in games a lot. I've noticed. A lot of the time I bitch about the story of a game harming the gameplay, because it's so bad or
Oh.
like it gets in the way and that kind of thing. When it there are lots of games where, like, to me, it is gameplay first, and it's only when a story is particularly good or particularly bad that I really talk about it, you know? I'd say the Final Fantasy 2 and 3 stories are good examples of, like, while you're playing it, you'll be into it, and you're like, "Alright, this is what's happening, cool. Whoa, this happened now. Alright."
Hmm.
But, like, if I'm gonna, I don't really think
It
about
it
it any
doesn't
further
shove
than
it in
that,
your
though.
face. Basically.
Yeah, right. It doesn't get in the way. It's nothing particularly amazing.
You don't have to
Uh,
read a novel at the very start of the game. You're just kind of like, all right, I'm a magic user, I'm a thief, I'm a warrior, etc. Let's go kill shit.
right. And well, yeah, and you're given reason to care, with starting with the second one, they do the thing with like the family member and stuff and all that where it's like,
What?
okay, we have a motivation.
So you said that Final Fantasy 2 is kind of, or when you said Final Fantasy 1, you said it's just mechanics. I was asking, is that what kept you coming back for it? There's there is story in Final Fantasy 1, right? Like,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, the characters talk, you go to this place, then you go to that place. I think really though the story it's very it's super simple, like saving the princess kind of simple. I think
Yeah.
it's just that there's like four crystals and you are the warriors of light
Oh
and
my
you got to go
god, dude.
light up the four crystals to save the world. And like that's the story,
Why is
right?
that the story for the first 5 Final Fantasies though?
Yeah, that's the
God.
thing. So, right. So there's the crystals, you gotta light them up to save the world, and that's it. But along your journey, you're gonna meet some fun characters, and there's a lot of world building, right? Oh, we met the pirates and we got their ship. Then we went to the dwarf land, and they were inside the mountain, and that was pretty cool and neat. So like the world is really cool. But the actual plot of what to do is very, we can compare it to Dark Souls if you want, where like, the thing that they tell you to do is really simple, but then like everything you do along the way is really great.
Just get
Uh
souls.
well, you see all the cool world and shit, and everything around you like implies this like long going world and story that's really cool and cooler than the actual plot of what you're doing. Which
That
is
was
something that
something.
I'm into.
Okay, that was something that I didn't like about Dark Souls actually when I first tried it. I was like, what is all this? Why do it looks cool. I love
Mhm.
running around in it. It's beautiful, it's well done. But it feels like I'm playing an MMO. Why am I here? It's just looks like structured, like this building is here just to be a cool looking building in a video game. It's not like I I have no idea of why I'm in the universe that I'm in, and why it feels like I am dead in some kind of limbo.
Yeah. The story of that game, as well as like Destiny, I think this was something I really liked about Destiny, was that like the plot is very simple and doesn't really get in your way. And instead, as you play the game, you don't really know what's going on at first, but like as you play and as you look at all the beautiful artwork and you see all the different enemies and like what they look like in what places and that kind of stuff, you just kinda start to absorb the story, you know what I mean? You don't read the story, you just kinda soak in it,
Hmm.
and eventually it kinda seeps in and you're looking around and you're like, "Yeah, I think I get it."
Well, I tell you what, man. Never have I ever fallen into just a nasty ass swamp and then just was sitting there soaking it all in and just meant, man, this is great.
Mhm,
That's what I feel
mhm.
like when I'm playing Dark Souls. I'm like, it's not that I need games that have like super linear story paths, like Crash Bandicoot. Well, not so much a story, but you know what I mean. Like, I don't need to be led along the entire time. I just want an idea of what's going on because I'm the kind of nerd that like I could read 40K and Star Wars lore all day just because it's there in the background for me to read and explore. Like when I played Mass Effect, I spent like hours just looking at all the journal entries that were unlocked because I like to know what's going on around me. I like seeing tie-ins with real science and stuff with Mass Effect. With this Final Fantasy game, you're right. It is a lot like Dark Souls. Well, the early ones are, where you just kind of like know what to do because the game is built to kind of get you to know what to do in order so you can keep playing. But it's not the story that's pulling me through that experience. It's just the okay, I guess I do this now.
Totally. And yeah, like I'm kind of right. I'm kind of the opposite of what you're saying. Like you say, we're like, I don't want to like, well, it depends, but I don't really like to be told every detail. I just kind of want to see something happen and just go, "Huh, weird," you know? And then like after I see more things that are cohesive and everything is, nothing's contradicting, but weird things keep happening, eventually you're just kind of in the world and you're
Mm-hmm.
immersed.
Yeah.
Uh but that said, I do like reading item descriptions in Dark Souls, to get those little bits of story also. Um,
For what I just said, and reading about stuff, I have never cared too much to ever pay attention to item descriptions, unless there's something like an actual like a key hidden thing, and that you need that little bit of knowledge in order to get like a secret or to advance the plot or something.
mhm. I would say like Dark Souls I think does a perfect job with the item descriptions because it's always just like here's physically what the object is, here's what it does when you use it, and then here's some weird story tidbit, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
I do like
Like,
that.
oh, here's something about this guild of hunters who used these during this type of ceremony, and you're like, oh, okay. Well, I don't know. And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about, where it's like this little tidbit that doesn't mean anything in context, but you're just like, it doesn't have context, and you're just like, oh, weird, and then you go on, but you absorbed it. And I think where that really set in the best for me was in Sekiro, where there's these like eel. Gosh, what was it called? Like eel livers or something? What were they
I didn't play
exactly?
Sekiro yet.
There's some item that the description of it when you first read it, you're just like, oh, okay, it's used in some ceremony or something. I don't know. And it's like, all right. But then you keep finding them in places that look like there should be something that's more special, you know? And
Mm.
at first that was weird to me. I was just like, why is there this big like thing here that looks really ornate and stuff, and then it's just got this fucking eel liver in it. And what this item does is it makes you more immune to lightning damage for 10 seconds or something. And you're like, why is this item always presented in this way that's like so extravagant? But then you start to see it so many times, then you start to realize, wait a second. It's because in the world, it's part of this ritual thing. It's part of the worship of this thing that's lightning based and all that. And you start to just kind of like you start to get it. I love that.
I just figured it was an electric eel, and the more you keep it in your pocket, the more resistant to electricity you are because you're used to the shocks by now.
But I'm saying, like, why do you keep finding it in these specific places? And then
Oh, okay.
and then you start to figure that out, and I
Oh,
love that
for the
shit.
story development. Yeah, I like that too.
Yeah, yeah.
I love. I think about like in some of the Elder Scrolls games, like you'll see a whole lot of like human chunks in places where there happen to be people who worship. It's Namira, I believe. Namira, who is one of the Daedric goddesses of cannibalism, I want to say.
Mhm.
So you just kind of like, well, who the fuck is Namira? Why do I? It's just a cult. It's a quest. I got to go to this quest and kill these cultists and yada yada. You could do that, or you could wonder about why is Namira revered? Why is there a cult who would worship her? Why would they go into a cave? Oh, probably because they have to lure their food there. They have to
Yeah.
make sure that they have their food. And what's their food? Oh, you'll never know unless you investigate.
Yeah, yeah. That type of storytelling is great. Or like in Fallout 3, there's this one bathroom stall that's got a robot sitting on the toilet, and if you pull him off the toilet, there's a piece of scrap metal in the toilet. It's
I
great.
love that. Yeah. And talking about item descriptions, it makes me think of Elder Scrolls again, where, man, what a great way to intro to a game that, hey, read item descriptions, pay attention to your shit, other than the scrolls of a carrion flight. Which in Morrowind, you start a game off, you go, you find this weird dead wizard elf dude. You're like, why the fuck is this guy dead? What is this scroll? And then you pick it
Well,
up.
doesn't he land in front of you? Don't you hear like ah, and then he lands?
If you're not a scrub like me and avoided that area for a good bit. So you do hear the
Okay.
screaming, and then for me, I was off somewhere else, and maybe I just didn't hear it in the game, but I just found a dead body, and I was like, what the fuck is this? And I pick it up, and
Okay.
then, of course, you go flying through the air, and then you die of fall damage. So that was a cool little shock to the system to get you to understand, hey, pay attention. I like that.
Right.
I don't like fucking having only sprites to look at, 2 mile an hour text scrolling, and basically no context as to what's going on, as like these original Final Fantasies are. And even more than that, I hate grinding. But I agree with your original point. It just does make it more interesting.
Yeah. If you don't grind, then the game's a little bit harder, and
Yeah.
you got to think a little harder, and I like that.
Mhm.
The other thing is that so a lot of people also, I forgot to mention, don't like random battles.
Oh, I hate them.
Because like even if you're not intending to grind, you still get into a lot of battles. Well, you just start running from them.
Yeah.
At some point while you're playing Final Fantasy, if you're getting into battles with enemies that you don't think it's worth fighting, run from the battle.
But
It takes no
honestly,
time,
but
and you're
honestly,
back on the world map.
I think it's less annoying having to fight, and way more annoying having to instantly, oh shit, now there's creatures, like, oh, crazy music. It's like, I hate this because I played so much Pokemon as a kid, and grinding's a little bit different in Pokemon, because there's also the element of, I wonder if I'll find something rare to catch, so you're incentivized to grind at certain points. Where in Final Fantasy, it's like your only incentive is to level up or increase your skills, and it forces you to buy the random encounters, and doesn't make the random encounters seem like it's worth the the very minuscule trauma of having to deal with that music again and again and again and again, and then having to run every time, knowing you're going to get nothing from it because you're just going to run.
I guess I see it differently because in Pokemon, being incentivized to grind because you might find something is as opposed to Final Fantasy, where you're just not incentivized to grind at all, so you just don't.
Uh,
Like the
well, you
the
have the
battles that
incentive of advancing your skills and your level, but other than that, yeah.
you'll get that naturally though, just by going where you're going and fighting the battles.
I agree. So
Yeah.
I don't want to have random encounters. I'd rather there be monsters physically on the map that I can run up to and kill.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so I guess I should specify, when I say grinding, I mean when you are not adventuring and you are only like running back and forth in order to get into battles, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you just need to move from point A to point B and there's 3 random battles in the middle, that's not grinding. That's just fighting some battles, or maybe running from them if you don't want to fight them.
Yes, but you specified 3. 3 seems like a reasonable encounter rate. I'm talking about games that take that and up it to 5 or 6.
Right, sure. Depending on how long the walk is, then there might be more than that.
Yeah.
And how much like exploration you're doing of like the corners and stuff. But anyway, so Final Fantasy 3, I do remember the story being engaging while I was playing it. Like I'm saying, just enough, right? There's just enough plot to give you some surprises every now and then. It's like, here's a character. Oh, he's a real bastard. Oh, here's the bad guy. Whoa, there was a twist. That kind of thing. It's nothing I'm gonna write home about, but while I'm playing it, it kept me motivated and engaged. And didn't get in the way. So Final Fantasy 3 overall, like, I say that 7 is like my favorite Final Fantasy, and a huge amount of that is the nostalgia of growing up, and I don't know how to separate myself from that. I can't do it. It's not possible. So my opinion of 7 is kind of irrelevant because I grew up with it. It's gonna be my favorite. But for these first 6 that I played, 3 was the best.
How young were you when you were introduced to Final Fantasy?
So yeah, when I played 7, I don't know. What year did it come out?
I want to
97?
say 97, yeah.
Or maybe it was 98.
Might
And
have
I
been
think
90. No, it was 97.
and I want to say we got it a little after it came out, so I was probably 8 or 9.
Yeah, so you got into it a hell of a lot younger than I did. I want to say when I played it, I was 11. I mean, mind you, I got into it by trying to buy Final Fantasy 8, so.
Right, so 8 was already out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering where the
Yeah.
nostalgia comes from for you, aside like for the older Final Fantasies, not post 7.
I'm sorry. Say that again.
Well, you said you find it hard to separate the nostalgia from the experience to, I guess, accurately judge it. I was asking where the nostalgia is coming from on these earlier games.
Oh, I'm talking about just 7. I'm saying
Okay.
my opinion. I'm saying if I say that 7 is my favorite, it doesn't mean anything because that's the one that I'm extremely nostalgic for.
Yeah, okay, I got you now. I got you.
Yeah. But yeah, so 1 through 6, I thought 3 was the best. But hey, let's not get ahead of ourselves. 4 came next, and that was Super Nintendo. So Super Nintendo.
Oh wait, hang on.
these
Sorry,
are
was three NES?
yeah, 1,
was-
2, and 3 were Famicom.
I looked up 3, the graphics of 3 a minute ago, and it looked Super Nintendo-esque.
Yeah. So okay, right. There's. I forgot about this fucking elephant in the room that you need to address whenever you talk about old Final Fantasy. If you're in the United States of America, there were 3 games called Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3. However, Final Fantasy 2 and 3 are not Final Fantasy 2 and 3. They are Final Fantasy 4 and 6. Because here's what happened. Final Fantasy came out, and it came out both places. Awesome, cool. Then Japan got Final Fantasy 2, and they got Final Fantasy 3 on the Famicom, and those never came over to the U.S.
Do you think Square was just like, we already called it Final Fantasy, man. We can't give them another one.
Well, what I heard was that it was one of those things where Final Fantasy 2, it would have come out way too late. Like moving games over to the US took forever.
Oh,
You know?
okay.
And so by the time they were finishing up Final Fantasy 2's translation, Final Fantasy fucking 4 was already coming out. And I think that one they were working with translating a lot earlier, like while they were developing it and not after the fact. And like the Super Nintendo was already out and stuff. And so they kind of at that point just didn't want to release Final Fantasy 2, this old ass game in the US, you know, they just didn't think anyone would buy it. I think that was the reason.
Okay.
So
Final
someone
Fantasy 4.
might tell.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, right. So then Final Fantasy 4 comes out in Japan, and because we didn't get 2 or 3, 4 comes out in the US as Final Fantasy 2 for Super Nintendo. Then Japan gets Final Fantasy 5. That one doesn't get ported to the US.
I'm already lost.
Then Japan gets Final Fantasy 6, and that one does get ported to the US, being the 3rd Final Fantasy game to be ported to the US. So it comes over here, and they call it Final Fantasy 3. So
the first ever, like, quote unquote steampunk Final Fantasy 6 is Final Fantasy 3 on Super Nintendo.
Yes.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah. So then finally, though, when they made 7, they just cut that shit out, and they called it Final Fantasy 7 in both the US and in Japan. And then people in the US are like, what do you mean 7? What happened to 4, 5, and 6? Now, again, really they were asking without knowing what happened to Final Fantasy 2, 3, and 5, but 4, 5, and 6. And so 5 and 6 were released as Final Fantasy Anthology for PS1, which was confusing because we did already get Final Fantasy 6 as 3, so now it's 6 on PS1, but along with this Final Fantasy 5 that we didn't have. Then there was Final Fantasy.
And that should be noted. Final Fantasy V, for the first time ever, didn't come on the original system that it was on in Japan. It only came to us a console generation later, which is
Yeah.
the PS1, which is how I played Final Fantasy V. It was the first way we ever got to play it, but like I think a lot of other people played it another way. Like they had a different way to play 5 later on.
Yeah, I remember my cousin playing it with a fan translation like a
Mm-hmm.
super long time ago. Um, so, uh, so where were we? There was Anthology that was 5 and 6. Then they released Final Fantasy Origins for PS1 that was 1 and 2. Again, we already
Oh.
had 1, but now we had a 2 that was Japanese 2 and not American 2. So okay, we got that one now. And then there was Final Fantasy I can never remember the name of this one. It was Chronicle or
Chronicles,
something.
Final Fantasy Chronicles. It had Chrono
Okay.
Trigger as a pack in.
Yes, it was Final Fantasy 4 and Chronicles.
Yeah.
Uh, which
Or
also we
Chrono
already
Trigger, yeah.
had 4 in the form of Final Fantasy 2. So that leaves Final Fantasy 3 as, even though they went back and like released all these old ones on PS1, they didn't do 3 for some reason. We didn't The US did not officially get Final Fantasy 3 until they remade it for the Nintendo DS.
I was gonna say, when I looked up Final Fantasy 3, I found all these 3D like DS looking games, like really good looking actually for a handheld. Like it was a straight up remake. Is it good? I would actually play it that way.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's good, but I played it on Famicom, so I'm going to be a huge snob about
Oh.
everything that was harder about that version. So okay. So 4. Let's get to Final Fantasy 4. It's real so the Super Nintendo is when the stories of the Final Fantasies did get to be way more in depth
Hmm.
with like characters that had more memorable like portraits. You know, like one thing is just the drawings of the characters. The portraits looked way better on Super Nintendo, so you actually got more like what the characters look like. You had a face for the names and stuff, you know? And yeah, all the characters were named now. In Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3, you had to name your own characters. Final Fantasy 4, now they have names. You can name them, but they have names now.
Well, that's likely
So yeah,
because of where the story is just getting more important. You can't just have 4
exactly.
nameless heroes.
Exactly. Cause yeah, also in the other 4, you know, you name your 4 dudes and then you start the game with a party of 4, you know, go have fun. Uh, but this, you know, this one is like, okay, hey, here's your main character. You're gonna be him for a minute, and he's got a partner. Now that partner's gone, some other people are gonna come in. They're part of the story. They got names and faces and, you know, personalities, and we're with them for a little bit, and then they leave the party and some other dudes come in, you know. So 4 was the first one to do all that, right? So it really took you on a little adventure. Um, it didn't have a job system though. It kind of did what like 6 and 7 do, where like the characters have jobs, you just don't pick them, you know.
Hmm.
So like this guy's always a paladin and this guy's always a white mage and stuff.
That would stick
But
for a
you know,
little while.
4 was also the first one to introduce active time battles.
Yeah, so
And
this was
let me
actually, I wanted to ask you. You were talking about earlier how you loved in the first Final Fantasy how you kind of have to plan where your attacks are going to go. You have to plan for how slow that character is and when you're going to attack there. In when you were talking about that, I was wondering does whether or not the game did have that live combat thing going on to where it was like, well, I could attack or I could just sit here, and if I just sit here for a little while, will I die while they attack me, or is it like a totally turn-based experience? So I guess it's sounding like the latter.
Yeah. So 1 through 3, totally turn based. You have all the time that you want to choose all of your actions for all of your characters, and then everything plays out in sequence before you get back to choosing.
Yeah.
But yes, so Final Fantasy IV introduces the active time battle system, which I don't love. A lot of people really like it just because it feels more actiony.
Yeah.
but and it feels faster paced, you know?
I
I
think I'm
don't
one of
think
those
so though.
people.
I don't think it's any faster paced. I mean, if you're picking all of your moves, like, so it's a little faster paced than 1 through 3, where you pick everything and then everything plays out, right? Well, not even. It's not even
You know what
faster.
it is?
Anyway,
It's probably it's probably in the game entirely as a psychological aspect, like something to
right.
trick you into thinking that you need to go faster than you actually need to be.
Well, you do have to go faster though. So
Well,
let's talk
yeah,
about
you will be, but it's like a sense
what
of
is
urgency.
ATB? Yeah, so what is ATB? Active time battle is where now, instead of the game being turn-based, characters just have bars that fill up according to their speed, and when their bar fills up, they get a turn, and they take it right then and there, right? Now, that sounds fine. Like, it's just like it's turn-based, right? Except if you sit there for a minute, the enemies, like, well, like in slow motion. If it was in slow motion, it's no different. But what actually ends up happening is that while one character is taking their turn, another enemy's bar fills up, or another character's bar fills up, and they throw their thing next in the queue, and so there's a queue of turns that's happening, right? While one animation is playing, another character queues up their next move. Then someone else's bar fills up and they queue up their next move. And they're just. So you have this stream of turns that's always happening. There's always an action happening. It pretty much never comes to a time where you're just waiting for someone's bar to fill up. There's usually always something happening. Um, my issue with it though is that it might as well be turn-based. Like, why have it be this queue? The only difference to me is, like, instead of it having be like, okay, so an easier way to understand it would be someone's bar gets full. Okay, now it's their turn. And you just pick their thing off of a menu and they take their turn, and then whose bar fills up next? Now it's their turn, right? That's how like Final Fantasy Tactics does it. And that's like, you could do that. It's turn based. Great. But instead, what happens is your bar fills up, you get a menu, it's time to pick your turn, and all of this time that you're spending picking what you want to do, the enemies are just getting free moves.
Yeah.
You know? And
um,
that's what it actually turns into. And so to me, it's like, it's just like it's turn based, but the enemy gets extra moves.
I think it depends on what you can do in the game in the time that you have your turn coming up to you. Because if you look at games like I can't remember which game it is, but I remember strictly recalling like this time where there was a boss I was fighting, and the boss was only vulnerable at a certain period of time where like it was literally a timed event where at a certain amount of time it would open up its chest cavity to vent its excess heat or something, and that's when you strike. So what I would do is I would wait until every character's bar is full, but using when they get their turn, you have to do something like just do defend or something like that where it doesn't consume that action, I think, and you can all just unload all your attacks at once. And then, of course, the downside being that you have to recover all at once too. But a lot of burst damage, so it's like
Yeah.
it's not for DPS. It's for get this fucker right here strategically timed.
I can see that being cool. I think that that can be achieved in turn-based stuff also. Like in Final Fantasy X, there's parts where the boss is only vulnerable for a certain amount of time, and the different actions that your characters take have different delays until their next turn, you know what I mean? So like if you just defend with a character, then their next turn will come faster. So you can
Yeah.
kind of use that. You can almost use that as the same effect of keeping everyone's bar full, you know? Uh and then having everybody's turn happen sequentially after the boss does their thing that makes them vulnerable, you know what I mean? So you can do the same. I get it though. That kind of stuff does feel kind of cool.
It's like when a nurse needs to give you an injection of something and they just start tapping the injection site to distract you from the actual needle going in. Maybe that's what these like bars are, these time bars. Maybe they're just there to make you think shit's a little bit more crazy and intense than it is.
So I know what someone out there is thinking. They're thinking, Dash, put the ATB mode on wait
That
because
too.
the wait mode fixes the problem that you're talking about. No, it doesn't. Here's what ATB wait does, all right? When your bar fills up and the window pops up of it's your turn, nothing has stopped yet. If you sit on that spot, time is still moving. The only time that ATB wait actually pauses the action is when you enter a sub menu. So, like, if you pick magic and the magic window opens up, now the action is paused for you to select from that menu.
Oh, is this the same in every Final Fantasy, or is it?
Every game that I've played that uses an ATB system, that's how it works.
Huh.
Even in Chrono Trigger.
Crazy.
Yeah, or like if you pick attack and then your cursor moves to like select your enemy, that also puts it in wait mode.
See, that's what I
But
was going to say. I think I played Final
yeah,
Fantasy VII that way, and that's what happened, was when you actually choose them, it stops. Like, their
yeah.
animation stopped, too, if I remember correctly.
But what it does though, it means that if you want to stop and think about your turn for a second, you have to get your turn and then like go into a menu and think about it for a minute and then
Ew.
back out of the menu to then pick what you actually want to do. And I
Yeah.
don't know, it's just kind of stupid. It's like I just like turn-based battle systems, man. Not into the ATB. It doesn't ruin the game. I just don't like it.
I
But hey,
agree. I've played RPGs before that, supposed action RPGs in the way that Final Fantasy eventually ended up going. I didn't actually play those later Final Fantasies, but the ones where you actually go up to and start attacking things, I gravitated towards those more because I like the actiony feel. But in practice, yeah, you get a lot more time to think and ability to plan shit out, like a complex spell action. Like, well, at this certain point here, I'm going to use fire because he'll be weak to fire at this point, and then we can time it there, and so on and so forth.
yeah. Yep. But 4 had a cool story. I liked the introduction of story being such a big focus on the game. Overall, I thought Final Fantasy IV was, first of all, significantly easier than the other ones. Uh,
That explains why a lot of the people on the internet like it for its story, because I guess they beat it.
I've heard that in Japan there is a harder version of the game that came out or something. I don't know if that's true. But that version didn't get ported or something.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I overall I thought it was a little short and a little easy compared to especially coming off of 3. 3 was hard, especially the ending.
Hmm.
So maybe it was just coming off of that made that happen. But yeah, overall though, liked it. But then we get to 5. And 5, if 3 isn't the best, 5 is the best. Because 5 brings the job system back that 3 had. And
Hey.
it's amazing and wonderful. We can get through these pretty quick now because now all we have to say is, hey, 5 brought that job system back. It's fucking awesome. Also, oh, I forgot to mention this about 4, but it also affects 5 and 6, and I touched on it earlier. The other thing that made 4 easy is that there's save points in the middle of the dungeons that you can use tents in now. Drives me
Hey.
nuts. So yeah.
All the
So
things I like.
so then there's 5. It's got the job system. It's great. I love everything about it. The story, it's got characters with names and faces and you
Okay,
remember them.
okay. Story of 5. I'm sorry. It was really boring.
The
Man,
only thing yeah.
I couldn't get past it. Like, this is the point at which I can start identifying with some of this, because this is the one I had to beat. I beat every last hour of this game on stream. Brutal. The story is what I came to the game for, because at this point in my Final Fantasy journey, I'm used to the story being what draws me in and keeps me there. I play this
Mhm.
game and it's just straight up, oh, we're traveling the world. There's crystals, the lights are dying, monsters are happening, and the cities are sinking. And it's like, okay, I guess I'm getting through this the whole time. The only thing story wise in that game that like really made me go, "Oh shit, this is kind of badass." It's something I won't spoil for anyone, but it's with the characters and their behavior, and not necessarily the story itself. So it's in the action of
Mhm.
the game, I guess. But it's like a character you kind of saw as noble was he did a noble thing, which
Yeah, yeah.
it's a fantasy game. It's gonna happen, I guess.
He was also the first character where I used this voice, and that's a normal one now.
Oh,
Um,
what did I use it for?
but
I think I made him sound like Scruffy the janitor from Futurama.
oh, okay, yeah. So yeah, when I talk about story with 4, 5, and 6, it is well, not so much 6, but at least with 4 and 5, it is still more like the old games where it doesn't get in the way, right? It's a really simple story that's just there enough to motivate you to keep going. Like, oh, there's a few twists, there's a
Yeah.
few big moments, but overall it's just kind of there to keep you going. What the Super Nintendo ones do better that I am uh complimenting is that the characters are more well defined. Like you're saying, you mentioned that there's a noble character, and just the fact that there's a noble character is like something that the first games didn't have because your four main characters, didn't.
They didn't
I
have
mean, this,
personality. They didn't have a history. You
yeah.
it's build your own adventure. And I guess from that perspective, those games make sense. But I'm
Hmm.
expecting the story to be there because that's just what Final Fantasy is to me. So it's not a fair
Yeah,
it's not
yeah.
a fair critique.
I guess 2 did have the characters in it, but anyway, yeah, I think it's a very basic story where if you're going to them for story, you're gonna be disappointed for sure. But yeah, they're like, there's enough story to keep you going, and I think that the added character drama that they added into the Super Nintendo ones does, elevate it a little bit from
Mm-hmm.
before.
Yeah, it
Um,
makes you. It makes you. Anything that can get you emotionally invested in something that is not like not even a fraction of 300 pixels wide is good. I don't care what they did to get you there. It's good if you can get into the story of something that's like Pokemon graphics, actually worse than Pokemon graphics,
are
objectively.
are you are you saying that Final Fantasy V has worse graphics than Pokemon?
It has less good graphics than Pokemon. Pokemon never had bad graphics. I played I
Moving
played
on.
I played green version, I should know.
So Final Fantasy VI is like a big topic.
Oh yeah.
5, I'll just say, like, overall, it was my next favorite after 3 because of the gameplay, because of the job system. There was enough story where I really
Oh wait, wait, wait,
liked
wait,
it.
hang on. You liked 5 less than 3?
Yeah, because 5 had save points in the middle of the
Oh.
dungeons that you could use tents in.
Okay, gotcha.
So yeah, so what that meant was that even though 5 has more quality of life and the jobs are a little bit more interesting and the gameplay in that sense was better, it didn't have that dungeoneering that I spent so long talking about before, where
Yeah.
you gotta go in just as far as you think you can get back out, and then you gotta pull out and refresh your party and save, and then go just a little bit deeper in. Love that shit, and that's not in 5 because, oh, there's just a save point in the middle of the dungeon, and I can save there and use a tent. So yeah, for that, pretty much honestly, for that reason alone, I would say that I had a better time playing 3. Um, but it's close. It's close though. 5 is
Okay. Yeah.
amazing. Uh, yeah. So then there's Final Fantasy 6. This one is like the story one. If you are going to a pre-7 Final Fantasy game for the story, you play 6.
Or 3
Uh,
in America.
so Yes, yes. If you're in America, I'm talking about the game that is titled Final Fantasy 3 for Super Nintendo, which is actually Final Fantasy 6.
Hmm.
That game, yeah, this is the one where like the characters are really great, especially a certain villain. Um and
Yeah.
yeah, just like everything that happens in that world and that story is like super super great.
You
Um
beat it though, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I that is the one Final Fantasy game ever made that I regret not beating. Because I didn't play it for very long. What I did was this was kind of in my I have a laptop for high school, so I'm gonna throw a shitty emulator on here that's probably gonna crash it and give me a virus. But damn it, I'm gonna do it. And I played Final Fantasy VI, and the way that they make Super Nintendo sprites cinematic in that game was mind blowing to me. They did great making that game, and when I only played about like 20, 30 minutes, but the entire time I was wrapped up in that story. It was really good.
Yeah. Yes. It looks great. Oh man, there's some super memorable parts in it that like are very Super Nintendo driven as far as like the way that they do the audio, the way
Hmm.
that they do the graphical effects and stuff. Yeah, 6 is where they took it to a new level story-wise. Gameplay-wise, it's it's more like 4, less like 5,
Hmm.
kind of in between though, where it's one of those games where all the characters are just a job, right? So they've got their special abilities that's just that character. It's less interesting to me than, you know, picking your jobs,
Yeah.
but it does make sense story-wise though, because you know when you meet the pugilist monk guy, you know, yeah, he's gonna be a fighter, right? So you know, it's got that element to it that's nice story-wise. Gameplay-wise though, little bit less interesting.
Yeah.
But overall, fantastic game though. Like uh, one of the better ones.
I often
Especially
I hear it get called the best Final Fantasy ever made a lot.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people think 6 is the best one. I think if you're going for story, it's a really good choice. You know, for me, overall, I'm sorry that all my opinions are shitty, but overall, I think 6 landed somewhere in the middle for me.
Okay.
Just because I just love the gameplay of 3 and 5 so much more, you know.
I will
Um
say, when I was getting through 5, and I do mean getting through, man, I said this before, but that was my lifeline. Like, just playing with stats and what you could do to grow a character. Like, what the fuck is a samurai dancer class gonna look like? What can they do?
mhm.
I had a red mage that, like, my main character. I made a red mage because was it the first game that had red mages? 5.
Gosh, I don't know. I don't know which
Okay,
one introduced that. I mean, I think Final Fantasy 1 had red
really.
mages if I'm not mistaken,
I didn't even
but I'm
like
not sure.
I didn't really play any games that had like anything like the red mage in it. So I was fascinated by the idea that he was, a master of all, or jack of all, master of none, where you could get like and it made sense early on in the game, which is why I went with it. You could do black magic and white magic by default as a red mage. It's just you would never get heal spell 4 or 5 or like black magic 4 or 5. You could only use the level 3 tops version of that spell. So later in the game
Mhm.
it made less sense because you do less damage, unless you spec your character specifically to be like a support character, where when I'm not needing to heal I'll cast damage, when I'm not damaging I'll heal, and when I'm totally out of mana, then someone will throw a fucking ether at me or something. I don't know, fun thing to do. But like that alone, I'm lucky I experienced that after Final Fantasy 7 and 6 and 10 and all that, because I actually would have been like, fuck, why didn't this keep happening? This is so fun to play with. I get it though, because like once you have games like where you have a character where one guy's arm is a fucking machine gun, he's kind of destined to be a ranged damage character. He's not going to be a spellcaster a whole lot. I mean, you'll probably use a little bit of black magic on him just to just change it up a little bit. But when his only melee weapons are like the really rare Morningstar mace ball attachment for his wrist, or just a big fucking iron fist, those are like those are gonna shit on that ability to make that a story compatible system with a class.
Yeah. Yep, totally. So yeah, and that was the thing is that like yeah, 6 is really 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 good. It was just that I had just played 5 was the thing, you
Mm-hmm.
know? So yeah, I do appreciate a lot of the stuff that that game did though. Great story. It had some really good puzzles also, like town puzzles and that kind of thing of figuring out secrets or how to progress or that kind of thing. Yeah, some really really great stuff, you know. Awesome soundtrack as well. Um Cool game, cool game. And that's Final Fantasy 1 through 6. I also played 7, 8, 9, and 10, but I feel like I feel like we have to talk about that another time. It's
Well,
gonna take up so much time.
I guess to preface this for everyone who didn't know, who was literally everyone, we were kind of going to talk about Final Fantasy X too, because that's what Dash has been playing. But
Right.
I guess we needed the context of Final Fantasy first, because honestly, there's a lot of bones to pick in that series in general.
Yeah, yeah. And oh man, do we like that's the thing is there's I the old games, even if they have flaws, they're not really like, "Oh, I'm mad about it," you know? It's just like, yeah, it's an old game and they were figuring things out. Later in the series though, we start to get mad at it and you know, I
Okay, all
start
right.
to get I start to get a little upset at some things that happen later.
Okay. Well,
Um
like what?
like oh man. Well, 10-2 is a pretty rough start. Um as far as
Do you want to jump
some
into
things.
the dichotomy of 10 and 10 too? Because I can talk about this one a little bit too, since I played 10 enough to get almost to the end. Um, we can
Hmm.
talk about 7, 8, and 9 real quick too, if you'd like.
Yeah, let's gush about Final Fantasy 7 for a minute.
All right, because no one's
So
ever done
so
that.
so the thing about let me tell you the thing that stands out about 7 the most over anything else. It's the fucking soundtrack, dude. And this is part of why I think maybe it's a nostalgia thing that makes me like the game so much is that I think that the Final Fantasy 7 soundtrack is just by far no question the best game soundtrack ever. It's the best
Really?
Final Fantasy soundtrack. It's the best video game soundtrack. Man, I could listen to it my whole life. I want that soundtrack playing around me all the time. I like I would say I probably watch as much Final Fantasy 7 on Twitch as everything else combined. And the reason is because I just love I just want to have the soundtrack playing while I'm doing shit, you know? And
That's awesome.
you know, that's just it. I fucking it's so good.
I
But the other things, yeah, go on.
Oh, I was just gonna say I didn't when I played 7, I was nowhere along in my video gaming career to understand how to appreciate a soundtrack like that. Um, I will admit 7 has a phenomenal soundtrack. I would not say there was ever a point in the game where I consciously was like, "What is this music?" You know, like it's
No,
so
it
good.
happened. I'll remind you. It was the first time that the screen and instead of jun 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 da, 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 jun jun right instead one time there was a bigger more crazy enemy and the screen went and it went dude, when that shit happens the first time,
Did
that like woke me up as a person inside.
Did they not have
Like
boss music in the original games?
there was,
I
but
didn't.
not fucking. Well, also, I played 7 first, right? So,
Me too.
um, Yeah, so that's
kind
what I'm
of.
saying you're saying that like you played the game before you really appreciated soundtracks.
Yeah.
For me, 7 was like the game that made me appreciate soundtracks. And the moment was that boss theme kicking in the first time. And I was just like, holy shit, video games just got taken to another level.
I think I'm gonna take it back. Actually, I think there was definitely a period of time before playing Final Fantasy VII where a soundtrack of a game stood out to me like none other, and that would be Vector Man on Sega Genesis because you pop that
Mm-hmm.
shit, pop that cartridge in, and you hit the power button, and you could leave that thing alone for the rest of the night. Maybe just hit a couple times, and you've got a rave going on in your house. Like that
Yeah.
soundtrack was just so different from any other thing I was used to hearing at the time. There's actually an interview with the original composer of that game on YouTube. There was someone who did like an hour long interview. I appreciate it. I might put that video in the video description if I find it. It's not relevant to Final Fantasy, but Final Fantasy VII, I think its best soundtrack moments were when the soundtrack became invisible to the experience, which is you just kind of like felt the emotions of the scene because
Yeah,
of the
totally.
music without even knowing it's necessarily because of the music. It's just the music is like that cheap MIDI sound. And this is a testament to that soundtrack. The fact that they can evoke such emotional response with a shitty little MIDI piano and a couple of like percussion and bells is fantastic. But that just we're also talking about Nobuo Uematsu here. So he's like
Yeah.
the Final Fantasy music guy. If there's an amazing Final Fantasy song that you've listened to, he's the reason behind it basically. And
Yeah.
man, there are some. I go back to 5 when there's two specific bangers, and they always have to deal with Gilgamesh. It's like battle on the big bridge is like his theme for the boss, and like that was the point in the game where I was like, why is this music 10 times better than every other track in the game? So
Yeah.
I think he cut his teeth earlier on making good music, but I will admit Final Fantasy V's percentage of its soundtrack being amazing, uh, nowhere can hold a candle to Final Fantasy VII for sure.
Yeah, 7 is like every single track
Yeah.
is memorable and excellent.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like it runs the gamut so well of like those really soft
Yeah.
emotional tracks versus those heavy metal 6/8 tracks. Um oh, it's just so good. And
Was
yeah,
that? I'm assuming you're talking about the time signature.
yeah. 6/8, man. That's how you it makes it more metal.
I saw this one thing this recently. It was like a tweet or something. It was like all music is in 4/4 time if you don't count it like a fucking nerd.
Or I love the idea because I've totally done this. I was watching something about the Dance of Eternity, the Dream Theater song that's like known for having over 100 time signature changes.
Oh god.
And one of the comments on YouTube was, "I just bang my head in 4/4 and just wait for it to line up every once in a while."
Yeah, basically. uh,
Uh,
so
so
I was gonna say you were talking about Final Fantasy 10. Oh no,
we just had a little
7.
moment there.
Did we? Where it was like we were kind of like our words were lined up with our thoughts. Yeah, it was weird. Of course, I also felt the delay on Discord too.
Oh yeah.
But
So Final Fantasy VII soundtrack. Okay, go on. I'm gonna quit talking.
I mean, I was basically done. I think Final Fantasy VIII had a great soundtrack too, but I don't remember it
Yeah.
as much.
8's soundtrack is a lot jazzier. It's got like a lot of
Yeah,
jazz organ in it and
loved
stuff.
it. It was a
And
change.
yeah, and it really fit the aesthetic of that game as well, because that game was a lot more. I don't know. The game was a lot groovier.
It was the most anime Final Fantasy or Final Fantasy game we had gotten at all, ever, at
Yeah.
that point.
Yeah. So one thing to talk about with 7 is that it was the transition to 3D. It was on PS1 and it was in 3D now, baby. But I thought it was still very, very classic in that, like, when you're indoors, it's still like, here's the drawn interior with black abyss around it, and you're just in this little thing,
Oh, when you're
and
in the
you're a
combat section, like when you're
no, no, I'm
fighting.
talking
Oh,
about, like, you're like, when you're in town, right? And you go into a building, that building is just a little square
oh,
in
yeah,
the
yeah.
abyss, right? And it's just like an old school Final Fantasy game,
I
And
did
you're a
love
little
that.
chibi character running around. Yeah, it felt super old school. And then also the battle system felt very, very similar to 6, right? It's still active time battles. The different characters are their different classes, basically. Um, the only thing the thing that 6 or 7 took away from 6 is that in 6 every character is a well-defined job where they have a list of abilities that they can do because they're that job. 7 didn't do that. 7 was all about materia. And like really the only thing that made the characters really all that unique was their limit breaks, and most of their limit breaks were just I do damage to the enemies, you know?
That is true.
So the characters weren't as well defined gameplay wise in 7. But the materia system though, holy shit.
Fucking
Like you're
loved
saying.
it. Huge fan of the materia system. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So, right, that allowed you to put magic on anyone, and like equipping more magic on a character would skew their stats more magical.
Oh, that's
But
right.
then
Yeah,
that's all.
materia also provided stat changes. I forgot
And
about that.
then it's also like, materia is also how you get things like if you want to be immune to lightning, then you can link the elemental to the lightning on your armor specifically. But if you linked them on your weapon, then you did lightning attacks. Like there was a lot of complication to it that made it like really, really
Because
interesting
materia had
beyond.
different color. It had green for
Mm-hmm.
elemental like spells. It had yellow for like mechanics. It had purple for like it was like cover. And was steel a purple one where it just kind of
That
gave
was
you the
yellow.
yellow? Okay, so yellow gave you the abilities, I guess, and
Mm-hmm.
purple was like chance on hit or stuff like that. It was cool. And
Yeah,
red was
yeah.
summons and so on and so forth.
And then blues would link to another materia and augment how it worked,
Yeah.
or how it behaved. So yeah, such a cool
And
system.
when you'd see one
Um,
in the wild, you knew what kind of materia it was because it was a
mhm.
shining green gem or a shining blue gem, and it's like, oh fuck,
Yeah,
that's blue,
you
that's
see it.
red. If you see a red gem, you're like, oh fuck, I just unlocked a whole movie.
Yeah, yeah. Right. Loved all that stuff. And then 7 also got away from crystals for the story.
Thank
I think
fuck.
6 might have also. Gosh, as much as I praised the story for 6, I kind of don't remember what the overall story
Well, they didn't
was.
get away from crystals. They still had it as part of their. I mean, materia. Come on, the giant Mako reactors. Like that's where the crystal thing I still exists. But man, was it way more tolerable. And let's just talk about like. I was a huge fan of these like futuristic steampunky kind of Final Fantasy environments. So 7 and 6, beautiful, like unique. I'm just kind of jaded and tired of the traditional fantasy RPG setting, so maybe that's why it didn't appeal to me too much. And that's why I also never tried 9, which was another shift
Hmm.
back to classic Final Fantasy.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm
Aesthetics
glad
wise.
you brought up that they got away from crystals, but it's still like the same thing. Because yeah, it does get into like the overall
Life of the
story,
planet,
the
of the
overall theme of Final Fantasy, which is yeah, like the life of the planet, because that's always what the crystals represented,
the
right?
planet's
Was
dying, Cloud.
saving the planet. Yeah, and even that movie, The Spirits Within, was what had the same story of like the guy was the Spirits Within was just Final Fantasy VII story, basically, where the guy was like sucking life energy out of the planet and profiting off of it, you know.
I've heard it was
Um,
really bad, and I found out that I had 2 copies of it on VHS because I saw it in a Goodwill and went, "Oh my god, I'm gonna get that," and then I forgot I owned it because apparently it's just that forgettable, and I bought it again.
mhm. I thought The Spirits Within was a fine movie. It just, oh man, it had nothing to do with Final Fantasy, right?
Hmm.
Like because it was completely sci-fi, right? It
Hmm.
wasn't the sci-fi fantasy thing. Totally sci-fi.
Huh.
And yeah, I mean, it was kind of just a rehash of Seven's story without the good characters, you know? It had the life stream basically, it had the Mako reactors basically. It was the Shinra part of the story, but not the Sephiroth part, you know, not the Genova part.
Okay, yeah. Which I
Yeah.
mean, let's be honest, why why go to Spirits Within when you can have that though? Because like
Right.
Sephiroth is the bad guy. He's the bad
Exactly.
guy.
Exactly. Sephiroth was huge. I mean, I fucking loved Sephiroth as a villain. I
Oh yeah.
think like it's one of those things where I kind of feel like everyone fucking blew their loads over Sephiroth for so long that then there started to be like this anti-Sephiroth uprising of like, no, it's all about Kefka, man. And like, yeah, Kefka's great, but like seriously though, Sephiroth is awesome.
Okay,
Like the way
I don't even know who Kefka is. I know he's a boss in the original like or older series, but like story wise, the fact that I have played and beaten multiple Final Fantasies and still don't really know or care who Kefka is tells me maybe Sephiroth is the cooler villain.
Kefka is awesome. He's the main bad guy of Final Fantasy VI.
Hmm.
Yeah, and he's great. He's great. Great villain. You know,
Cool.
nothing against him.
Is he
Um
Gilgamesh? Because if he beats Gilgamesh is a fucking dude. I love him.
yeah, I think I like them more. But the thing I love about Sephiroth though was that he had like this aura to him that I hadn't seen another RPG do with their villain, where it was like every time that Sephiroth showed up, the game got really weird. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
Like Sephiroth would just fucking like rise up out of the floor for some reason, you know? And like the music would get kind of weird and he would just and
Yeah.
everything he says for so long is just kind of fucking nonsense. And you're
Hmm.
like, what is this guy talking about? And then he just like flies away, you know? And it's like and you wonder like if it even happened, you know? And that's like powerful, cool shit for villains to do to like mess with you like that, to just be like, I don't even understand what just happened, but he was here for a second, I think. Yeah, I
Or was
love
he an
that shit.
illusion? Uh,
Yeah, that's the thing.
I want to say Advent Children, that movie they made of Final Fantasy VII like 10 years or so after the fact or something. I don't remember the exact story, but they like played on the theme of, well, damn it, I can't remember the name of the character, but there was like 3 or so like Sephiroth clones. I'm butchering the story.
Their
Or
names were Kadaj,
Kadaj.
Loz, and I don't remember the other one.
But they were like attempts at recreating like an actually obedient Sephiroth or something, and I don't know if that was by the Shinra Corporation or not, but they were there. But the whole entire like reason to keep watching that movie, if you weren't that into the story, was if you like there's just this hint that Sephiroth isn't dead. He's dead, but like there's him still out in the world, and now these people are causing problems. And it kind of just feels like, how much more money can we squeeze out of this series without having to remake the game 20 years later on spanning 3 different console generations that people are going to bitch at us about for years? I think
Yeah.
I think that shows you how powerful a villain Sephiroth actually is, because they kept dangling him in front of you in that early part of the game. You didn't understand what's going on because, like you said, it just like it's weird. The music got weird. What he said didn't make any sense, and you kind of like it jogs you into jogs your brain into thinking, okay, what is the context of what's going on here? What am I going to piece it together as later? Why is he significant? That sort of thing.
Yeah, and the story is told so well too, where it's like for all this time where you don't understand who Sephiroth is, but he's being built up, you know, it doesn't get boring because you're dealing with the Shinra, you know? The whole start of that game is all about Shinra and stopping them to
Hmm.
save the planet, you know? And Sephiroth is like this side thing that's like this just ultimate threat that we don't really know if we're ever going to be able to deal with him, but he's not the villain right now. We're trying to stop Shinra, you know? And then he comes in later as like the actual villain. And so I really like that too because it gives you so much time to build him up and be so weird with him while not just kind of making the player be bored because they're like, I don't know who this guy is. I don't care.
It's
You
such
know?
like seeing. Spoiler alert for people who haven't played Final Fantasy VII. I guess it's it seemed like such a crazy scene where you're like you finally infiltrate Shinra. You're ready to go. You get to the top floor. Wait, well, you have to go through these floors. Oh shit! Here's this laboratory. Oh, who the fuck is? God damn it! Was his name Hojo? I think.
Hojo?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Hojo, this crazy long-haired, ponytailed scientist guy, is looking at something. Oh, it's weird. Oh, hey, this dude with long gray hair just broke the fuck in. Oh shit, it's Sephiroth, and he there's something really gross in that tank right there. But before that happens, you see that thing in that tank, and you go, what the fuck is that thing? But it wasn't even story relevant at the time. It's you're taking on the Shinra. You're trying to get to fucking Big Man himself. And then the game tricks you into going to this whole separate storyline with the Sephiroth arc right here. Like, oh shit, what is this Genova thing? And then the way that they do it is they go, oh hey, in this room there's also a talking dog.
Yeah.
That was my favorite thing. I was like, what is this guy's story? I was like, there's so much to unpack in those scenes. I was like, this is great.
Yeah, and also, I'm glad you mentioned like the scenes with Sephiroth and like the shit in the tanks and stuff because like that in those parts, Sephiroth does not seem too pleased with Shinra either.
Yeah.
You know, with the things that he's saying. So that like also kind of builds him up as like as it being kind of weird because it's like, is he a bad guy at that point or not? You
Yeah,
know, because he kind of has the same goal that you do,
and you know
or so you
him.
think.
That's the thing is the
Yeah.
you don't know him, but you know him because the game gives you the history that you were in the military together, you were in soldier together, and so he
Hmm.
was this normal human person that used to talk to you just like an experienced soldier, and when he's talking here, he seems like a fucking madman. He has none of the shit he says makes sense, and the scenes that he's in is not something a normal human would do. So you're like,
Hmm.
is this the same person? You're questioning it all the time. There's so many questions that you're asking all the time of what's going on.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah, just oh my god, it's a good game.
Yeah.
And you know, I might even say that Final Fantasy VII is my favorite game of all time. Because I've talked about I talk about Killer 7 a lot as being my favorite, or like Wings of V as being my favorite game. But like considering what I'm talking about, where like I can just always be having a stream of Final Fantasy VII on, and I'm into it 100% of the time. I feel like it's sort of the answer that I can't get away from. That
This is
it's
great because you're the
it's
last
probably
person.
just it's probably just my favorite game ever.
This is great because you're like the last person I would ever expect to say what I guess at this point. Oh God, maybe not even anymore, but just because I'm old. But like for our generation, most people would say, "Oh, Final Fantasy VII, duh, favorite game." You know, I feel like that's a big answer for a lot of people, and you just seem so much more well versed in video games that you know a lot more games that other people haven't even heard of and played, and you still go to that one. That shows how good of a game, I guess, that really, how much of an impact it gave on everyone.
Right, right. Yeah. Like I'm snobby and I've played a million games and I would love to tell you that my favorite game, oh, you've never heard of it, you know? But nah, nah, nah. Dude, Final Fantasy 7 it's so fucking good. But all
So
right.
so we'll move on to 8, I guess. 8 did something that I didn't like, but only I didn't like it or I didn't hate it. And I guess the truth is really kind of in between in that I never really understood it, which was the not the sphere system. That was Final Fantasy X, but Final
Oh,
Fantasy
the
8,
junction.
the junction system. I didn't understand that at the age that I played that game at, so it kind of went over my head. And like I said, I only really got into the demo of it. So when I played Final Fantasy VIII, I want to say probably a good 10 years later, um, it just I went. I didn't even get to the point where you get to the demo, like in the demo discs where you're going on that beachhead and actually storming the town, and there's like shit going down. I didn't get to that part because it just didn't hold my attention long enough at that point. But I think that's less on the game and more on the fact that at that point in my gaming life, I haven't really. I was rapidly losing my patience for the time commitments that JRPGs require.
So I loved your story earlier about playing the demo of Final Fantasy VIII because I had the same thing,
Oh,
except that I had played 7 already. But
ah,
but I had that demo. It
hmm.
came with Brave Fencer Musashi for me. I think that demo was around a couple different things, but for me, we had Brave Fencer Musashi, which is another SquareSoft game for PlayStation 1.
This
And
doesn't
yeah,
sound
it
like
came
my
with it.
demo. You sound like you might have gotten a SquareSoft demo disc, honestly. I
It was specifically a Final Fantasy VIII demo disc.
oh, okay.
That
So
was the only demo on it.
I had it by playing the official. I had official U.S. PlayStation Magazine monthly, and they had
Mhm.
a demo disc with every issue. So I couldn't afford a subscription to it, but I would get the magazine at the grocery store every time I saw it, and it would show you the list of playable demos and then just a list of videos for other games that were out. So they had one that had Final Fantasy on it. I don't remember which one it was, but
Yeah.
man, I wonder if there's like a how many people out there do you think were like us as kids that didn't have a whole lot of games and they just kind of played demo discs solely for
I
a
mean,
little while?
I think a ton of kids. Yeah, I mean,
I,
I think so.
I feel like there's
But
something I can do with demo discs that'd be fun to do with YouTube. I don't know. That's a different thought.
oh yeah, there on giantbomb.com there used to be a series called Demo Derby where they just dredged up old demo discs and played the demos on them and watched the
Hmm.
videos on them and stuff. And that was kind of the best stuff because they played the demos and it's like, yeah, all right, here's demo versions of games that came out later, cool. But then there's like videos,
Yeah.
90s ass video game marketed to 10-year-olds fucking videos that were so good.
Man, do you want to know my favorite thing about the PlayStation monthly demo discs were every couple of months they would have a refresh in how they intro the CD. So there'd be a new, really shitty early 90s CGI, like bowling alley level CGI, with just like the most badass music you could imagine, just like put onto these demo discs with like, my God, dude, there was such a good video of the demo discs getting made on an assembly line where it's just like this really shitty looking conveyor belt would have like this ball of whatever, and then a Mario pipe looking smasher would come down and smash it into a disc shape, and then it would like throw it into it had like a conveyor belt to throw them in discs, like cases and like jewel cases, and then there'd be other things where it's like we're in space, and now there's this diner, a 50s style silver diner in space, and we're in the parking lot, and the parking lot is just it's just space. You're over here next to the diner in space, and there's a robot with the 50s style bob as like a flat metal slab of hair with gigantic like an hourglass figure. You know what I mean? And this is just like a space robot as 50s 60s sci-fi looking as you can get. And she turns around and she looks, and there's these two hot rods with no wheels, just they're spaceships that are cars that are hot rods. And she lifts her hand and she throws down, and they both go racing off. One's flying around the rings of Saturn, one's going through an asteroid belt, and they're just fighting and fighting. And then one of them gets hit by an asteroid, spirals off, goes off into Saturn's atmosphere, starts burning up, and just gets destroyed. And now you got some games to play.
Yep.
It made no fucking sense, but demo discs were my shit, man. I loved it for just like the weirdness about them.
Oh yeah,
they were great. Yeah.
So I had what I'm saying though is it was a different disc, but I had the same demo of Final Fantasy VIII,
Probably the
and I
same
had
file.
and I had the same. It had the little cutscene with Cypher at the start, and then you run up the thing, you have the Leviathan summon. I was so impressed by the Leviathan summon,
Mm-hmm.
and then you fight that thing at the end that has the big Jay Leno chin. But as a kid, here's the thing: is maybe I had, you know what? I don't think I had played Final Fantasy VII yet when I played that demo, and the reason I say that is I remember not being able to beat the demo because when I got to that boss, I just sat there casting Leviathan on him over and over again, not realizing that when the green numbers show up, that means I'm healing him.
Whoa.
Didn't realize it.
Hang on. This wasn't a. Was this a mechanic that appeared in earlier Final Fantasies? I want to say it was because
Yeah.
7 definitely had that.
Mm-hmm.
So you didn't. I guess you just played this demo first before playing all the others. I guess.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Is I
Yeah.
don't think I had played 7 yet. I want to
So
say
that
this demo
introduced
might
you.
have been.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That introduced you to the concept of numbers having different, colors meaning different things.
Yeah. And just to that kind of game in the first place. But anyway, I didn't actually play Final Fantasy VIII until what was it, a year ago now? 2 years
Wow.
ago now? Cause like I'm saying, over the last so I started this whole Final Fantasy journey in late 2018, I want to say, playing through every numbered one sequentially. So we get to 8, and I really liked 8. I like that jazzy
Me
soundtrack a
too.
lot, that different mood that the game had, where the characters are kind of more of like punks, kind of.
Yeah, they're because they're literally
Because
school
they're
kids.
kids,
Yeah.
yeah. But you know, older kids, punks. It's
Yeah.
great.
I mean, it's
Anyway,
high school, or
yeah.
college.
One thing I really liked about it was the battle system was very snappy. It's still ATB and stuff, but like what I was noticing about it was like two characters, like one character would go in and hit the enemy, and then before they even got back to their spot, the next enemy was or the next character
Oh, okay.
was already taking their turn. So things kind of moved a little bit quicker. They added the mechanic where like since you have a gun blade, if you hit R1 at the moment of attacking, you always get a critical hit, and that kind of stuff. So stuff like that was kind of fun. It was fun, stupid but fun.
Man,
Gun blades are dumb.
yes, but oh man. Okay, so I guess because I didn't get through it at all, I was always wondering what the significance of the pistol grip was to his blade as a kid. I later learned that my instincts were right as a kid. Gun blades are dumb, so I didn't think that's actually what it was. I thought it was just a weird looking, edgy styled sword, which in the game he used it as. He slashed people with it. I don't recall there ever being a moment where Squall just stands in place and goes, "Wapow."
Yeah.
He didn't do that, did he?
Yeah, I don't remember specifically.
I don't either.
But every single time that you hit an enemy, if you hit R1, it's like you're shooting them as you're slashing them and you get that critical hit. Pretty cool dude stuff there. But yeah, 8 also just it had that junction system that's really interesting.
How
So
did that
8
work?
was so how junctioning works is you bind your different spells to stats. So, in Final Fantasy VII, you have materia that are the
Mm-hmm.
different spells and you put them into the slots. In Final Fantasy VIII, it's kind of like the different materia slots are your different stats. So you equip fire to your strength, and then you equip cure to your defense, right? And the more of that spell that you have stocked, it gives a bonus to that stat.
Hmm.
So now we got to talk about drawing out in stocks. So also, Final Fantasy VIII doesn't have MP. Instead, you have to draw spells out of enemies. So like if
Oh, yes. This
yeah,
confused me a whole lot as a kid.
yeah, so, like, you would do, like when you get into a battle, and instead of killing the enemies, you'll do, like, draw on this enemy, and you can select the different things that they have. This enemy might have fire or slow, right? And you pick one to draw. So then you take your turn, you do the draw, and then it's like, "Good, hey, you got 5 of them, cool." So now you've got 5 casts of draw on that or of slow
Hmm.
or fire or whatever on that character permanently. But that also means that if that stat that spell is junctioned to also went up, you know, which
Can I?
sort of
How did they
means
How did they work this into the story? Like, oh, you can't learn magic, so here's how it works.
um gosh, how was it in the stories? It probably had something to do with the GFs. All I
Sorry, that
remember
was like
about
an
the
unfair
story
question.
really
That was
was
super
was
specific.
the well, no, it's a good question. If I had remembered, it would have been a good answer. But I probably had something to do with GFs. I don't know. But yeah, so it did slow the game down a little bit to have the draw system because it sort of incentivized you to just sit there and draw out at 255 or however many you could get of every single spell, you know? So like that took a minute, but then you junction your characters and they're really powerful and it's cool, you
Hmm.
know? So I don't know. I liked it overall. And then yeah, the story, like that one's pretty silly with its writing. 7 is pretty silly too a lot of the time.
Yeah, but
8
eight
can
is
be
the
silly.
most outwardly anime Final Fantasy we ever had at that point in time. Like it was
Yeah,
very you know school drama. That's an obvious theme. And then there's I guess you even work with your teacher for a bit. Quistis, is that her name?
yeah.
Yeah, big fan of her by the way. She's cool. She teaches you
She
to get.
was in my party the whole time.
Oh yeah.
She used a whip. I mean, I'm into whips, man.
Listen, I don't need to go into it. There's a lot of reasons I liked her, but
Mhm.
she takes you to the cave to get Ifrit, which is your first summon, and that's about the point in time in which I realized, oh, you don't start the game with Leviathan,
Yeah.
and it was just like it's
So,
kind of like it was almost a demo, like to show off
yeah.
things.
Yeah. So also, yeah, you're mentioning the anime thing. I talked about how Final Fantasy VII was still very classic
Hmm.
with the chibi characters and the indoors look and stuff.
Yeah,
Um, 8 moved away from that, and now the characters were like full
humans.
like humanoid character
Hmm.
models and stuff. Which looked all right, you know. I like the cartooniness, but I also like the realistic style. You know, either way is fine for me. The only problem though that I found was that I thought that the way that 8 did the camera angles was a lot more confusing.
Oh,
Like I felt like the camera angles when you were in town in Final Fantasy 8 was more like Resident Evil, you know, where like it
oh.
keeps changing camera angles as you're running around, and you never really have a clear picture in your head of what the fuck this place is shaped like, you know?
Yeah.
Which really is a problem at some points in the game when you're supposed to like get to certain places fast.
It's funny that you
Um,
say that because that brings up a very specific set of memories where there were a lot of times where the camera angle would change. And I guess we should point out this is still Final Fantasy when they're using pre rendered background images for 3D models to walk on top of or in front of, if you want to get real specific. So you're looking at a picture to tell you where you can and can't walk, and these are very low res images. These are 240p. Let's not forget. So they're they're low res, and that means you might not know that there's an area you can go that you actually can. So I remember there being so many moments in Final Fantasy VIII specifically where it would change the camera angle while I'm trying to get somewhere. And this Final Fantasy VII was not immune to this as well, but you would immediately get to this weird close up character, like version, like close up view of your character, and you just got to see the blurry face of the character, like Squall and shit. And I guess that just brings to mind the classic meme of Renoa talking to Squall in the Seed Academy. You know, you're the most handsome boy here. And it just shows like his zoomed in face where it's just like this shitty like block texture.
PS1 face.
Yeah. But yeah, I remember the camera being a problem for navigation.
Yeah. But overall I really did like 8. The story in that one though, I think is a little stupid. Like it's a little too anime where like all the characters have amnesia and it turns out that we all grew up together but we forgot. And I think they try to make it so that though they like the excuse that they give throughout the game is that it must be the GFs that are making their memories go away.
You keep saying this, and I keep thinking it's just meaning girlfriends because I don't remember what it means.
Right, sorry. GF, I forgot what it actually means. It's like Guardian
Force?
Fucker. But yeah, I don't know.
Guardian Fucker.
But it's
Let's
like
go
your
with
summons. It's your summons, right?
Yeah.
Like your summons in the game are GFs, and like each character has one or something. I don't totally remember. I think it's like you sync them. It's kind of like junctioning, where each character is linked to one of the GFs or something. Anyway, in the story, they're kind of saying that like this power is what's making their minds deteriorate or something. But I don't think that there's ever if I remember right, I don't remember if there's ever confirmation in the story that that's actually what's happening. It's like the characters are just kind of theorizing that the whole time. Because I don't know, maybe they just don't remember or something. So yeah, it's a little weird and silly. I will say though, without spoiling it, at the like very end of the game, I think that they do some like really fucking cool shit with the memory fuckery, and like the GFs are like killing our brains kind of thing. There's like a little bit of specific stuff that's like awesome, like visually really cool. But overall though, I did think the story was a little silly, and
I've heard that one from others as well.
Yeah. So 8 kind of ended up in the middle for me as well, where like gameplay wise, there were some things I really liked about it because it was just really fresh. You know, it was super different and it didn't feel like any of the other Final Fantasies in ways that I thought was good and fresh and fun because it's the 8th fucking one, you know, so I wanted it to be a little different. But yeah, also though, nothing, it wasn't like particularly amazing either. Kind of ended up in the middle.
I can see that.
And then yeah. So then lastly, I think we should end with we'll just talk about this one for tonight. And then 10 and 10-2 can be their whole own thing, maybe.
You want to do it as a separate episode?
It won't be a whole episode.
Okay,
10 and
sure.
10-2.
That's fine.
That'll just be my portion next time.
All right.
But quickly, we can talk about Final Fantasy IX, which, like you said earlier, they kind of went back to classic. They moved back away from sci-fi, back into the regular old fantasy world.
Now, for this, I have zero context. I don't even think I've actually stayed away from seeing gameplay because I told myself I want to play 9. So, like, 9 being such a crazy return to form for them kind of threw me off because the only thing I liked about Final Fantasy at the time was the environments that it was in. Like, that's what attracted me to it. I didn't care for the original fantasy kind of theme, and it seems like they doubled down on that very hard. And what I hear from a lot of people is that 9 is like the Final Fantasy to go to if you want a fan base that is in, well, I guess I shouldn't say a fan base, but if you want a perception that is like straight down the middle, either people love that game or they fucking hate that game. And from what I understand, most of the hate I've heard comes from the crazy encounter rate on monsters.
So it's not just the encounter rate, it's sort of exacerbated by everything else about the encounters in that game, in my opinion.
Okay.
So I don't know if you want to hear me talk about it, really, if you're planning on playing it. But I would say
go for it, yeah.
I kind of love and hate 9. but I'm much more on the negative side of it.
Okay.
Um,
I gotta use the bathroom real quick, but I can hear you. Go ahead and shoot. I'm
oh,
listening.
okay. Sure. I love the characters of Nine. Like super great cast of characters. And one thing to start off with is I'm also not a big fantasy person, but I think I'm just not a big Western fantasy person. I'm not super into like Lord of the Rings and Game of Thronesy kind of fantasy. I do like Eastern fantasy stuff though. Like old Final Fantasy. So it goes back to that, and I think that the cast of characters is super good, where like they all um they all are very visually distinct, very personality distinct, and there's enough of them, and they're all quite likable, and the way that they interact with each other is really great in ways that I think is better than Final Fantasy had ever done before. Where like, oh, if you put these two characters together, they're gonna kind of behave this way for a little bit, and that's really fun. And that was the really strong suit of the game. Um, my issue with the game really came down to the fact that they dialed back on doing new crazy stuff and made it back more like older Final Fantasy wasn't as exciting to me because I've already played a bunch of those. And then the other thing though was that it's like old Final Fantasy but slowed way back down again. Uh remember Remember when I was talking about ATB and I was saying that you're never actually waiting for bars to fill up because instead it's like one guy queues his attack up and while he's moving, another guy gets their turn, they queue it up, another guy gets their turn, they queue it up, right? So there's
Hmm.
always something happening. Final Fantasy 9 has a battle system where like it's so fucking slow. Like I felt like every animation took forever. And like just I don't know, like everything in the game in the battles is super drawn out and takes forever to where these ATB like queued up turns, I feel like that queue is like 10 turns long sometimes to where my bar fills up, I pick what my guy does, and he doesn't do that for like 45 seconds because all this other shit has to happen first that's already been queued up to the point where the strategic state of the battle has changed
Oh
by
no.
the time their turn actually happens to
Fuck.
where it's not even a good choice anymore,
Oh.
you know? And like, oh, it just drove me fucking insane and it made the game feel just overall like this huge slog where it's just like,
So
oh
so
man,
every encounter is Final Fantasy VII Knights of the Round.
yeah, yeah.
That's someone
Like,
that
oh
takes 10
man.
minutes to finish.
Yeah. So it's like the encounter rate is kind of high, but that's never really bugged me in games personally, but
That's a good thing not
it
to be bugged
does.
by. That pissed me the fuck off in Final Fantasy V.
It does, however, take a very long time to PS1 load into the battle,
Oh.
and then the battles just take so fucking long because the animations are so slow that especially after 8. I was talking about 8, how it's like the characters don't even wait for each other to finish to just start bang bang booming out these ATB
Hmm.
turns, you know? After that, it's like, oh man, 9 was just such a slog.
Do you think they
So
did that
yeah,
just because of the three games being not as Final Fantasy as Final Fantasy is known for being?
yeah, I think so. That 9 was deliberately very classic.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah,
Okay, so
so
I want to go back to the combat for a second. So in
mm-hmm,
Final Fantasy 1, 2, I mean, let's all the way up to 5. We're talking classic turn-based fantasy where, this character's got the sword, he's going to do this character's got the magic, he's going to do this. That's not too changed in Final Fantasy 7, I guess, except in Final Fantasy 7, 8 and 9 you have more, or Final Fantasy 7 and 8 you have more that you can do, in
mm-hmm.
terms of just generally like gameplay, what you can do. But is is 9 is nine's combat a lot like the original, or is it like 7?
Yeah. 9 is much more like 6, where each character is a class, and so they have like a whole
Oh,
sub menu of these are their class abilities that
okay.
only they have. Yeah. So yeah, much more like 6. And yeah, and that part of it's fine, kind of, I guess. I don't know.
I,
I
I,
like all the characters.
now that you say that, it actually does make a little bit more sense to me because I think about it and it's like, okay, if you think about the technological improvements of how a Final Fantasy game works, from the Super Nintendo to the PS1, massive jump in ability. So I guess from that perspective, I can see where they were like, hey, what if we took all this new tech and now that we know these new development techniques, what if we just kind of made a Final Fantasy game like that, like a real Final Fantasy game? I don't know why I'm like ascribing all this motive to them, like, oh, this isn't real Final Fantasy when it was like their biggest cash cow ever. It saved the series, but like, what if we made what we I assume that's what they think of as Final Fantasy because that's like just it's fantasy, you know. It's not sci-fi. It's not. It's wizards and warriors and yada yada.
Yeah. Yeah, right. And I guess the vision of like what Final Fantasy is definitely depends on who's in charge, right? Because lately, I feel like they haven't done one that isn't kind of sci-fi in a very long time. Well, I don't know. 14, I guess, doesn't have the sci-fi stuff in it, really.
Yeah, well, I was gonna
So,
say I've
never
heard.
mind.
I haven't played 14, but every single person I know who's played it fucking loves it. Says
It's a
it's a
great game.
really okay.
I mean, if you want to play an MMO, MMOs are for
Yeah.
some people and not for other people. If you like MMOs, Final Fantasy 14 is one of the best ones, I think. But yeah, so 9 just because of like how sluggish the combat felt and also how like not super appealing going back to um the old style was again necessarily, if it was still ATB and all that.
What was really
I don't
cute
know.
was a 3D rendering version of what everyone knew as previously the Black Mage, and
Oh,
the
totally.
character gets the name Vivi now. Very
Mhm.
cute, and like honestly, that Black Mage sprite style transitioned to 3D in a really like cute way. Like it's like that's not a human, but if you look at it, it's familiar, and it's a person, and it's just like
Yeah.
there's something just okay in the PS1 era. CGI graphics, like cutscenes, videos, just had that. I mean, we'll like joke around and call it like the bowling alley graphics, but like that early 3D, specifically cutscenes, you can just see like the poor animator at his desk looking at a PVM, messing with Bryce 3D, just making these 3D things happen and animating them. It's just like, it's so. I get that at the time it's revolutionary, but my God, dude, the pinnacle of 2D sprite gaming was so much better than early 3D. That early
Yeah.
3D just seems to have like an amplified, magnified aging process to it, to where it just looks considerably worse and worse the more technology improves. It's like exponentially worse.
Yeah.
But
It's another one.
there's something so
It,
like awesome about it that I love now.
Yes, it's another one of those things where I can't objectively comment on it because I
Mm,
just love it, you
yeah,
know? I love the look of old PS1 graphics and
me
stuff.
too.
I fucking Metal Gear Solid where the characters don't even have eyes because they just only have enough pixels for a few dark spots, you know? I think that looks so awesome. And like their mouths don't move, they just kind of jitter when they talk and stuff. Love that shit.
You know,
Speaking of,
oh, so go ahead.
mhm.
Good, good.
I was gonna say that went a good way of future-proofing Metal Gear Solid because that's the thing is a lot of PS1 characters did have eyes and did have moving mouths, and those graphics aged a lot worse
Worse.
than than the Metal Gear Solid like jittering, no eyes guy
Yeah.
because it leaves more to the imagination.
And you know, I've never had a problem with there's just simple things about how video games work where, like, if you understand the technical limitation, which doesn't take a lot of know-how in my opinion, because when everyone got a PSP, they immediately knew it wasn't going to look like a PS3 in their hands. You know, people know there's certain things about game development where suspension of disbelief and immersion to the story are just so much easier once you understand the limitations of the game. Like, of course, Snake is going to have eyes and mouth, and they're going to simulate talking by exaggerated head movements that no one makes.
Mm-hmm.
That stuff is so easy to forgive versus just like what was that game called? The fucking Garbage Man or something? God, Lawnmower Man. Where you see, like, have you seen the art, like the cover of Lawnmower Man?
I don't think so.
You would probably remember it immediately if you saw it. But the name Lawnmower Man, as you saw, just took me a second to recall. I didn't even think of it on the first try. But you see these early 3D like attempts at making like 3D looking images, like real looking images, quote unquote, and they just end up like this is where the bowling alley analogy comes in, because those like shitty CGI things are being shitty, whereas like, I mean, it's exactly as you said. You can forgive things easier if it's just like, oh, he's just talking. He's talking. There's no more to note about it. The game's gonna progress and we're gonna have a good time. It's not like, what the fuck is that thing? There's a monster as my teammate.
Mm-hmm. So yeah. So I'm a little hard. I think I'm a little. I might sound a little too hard on Final Fantasy IX because it's a great game, and I think people should play it, right? Uh, but but overall, it was probably my least favorite of 1 through 9.
Whoa, that's an honor, actually.
But it was good. It's a great game, and people should play it.
Okay, so you're okay. I guess, is it safe to call you a Final Fantasy fan then, since you've?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the ones that I have played so far.
Because the only people I know that object to Final Fantasy tend to be people who are not into RPGs at all, which we can just go ahead and discount that crowd right away. But a lot of other people will be like, well, Dragon Quest is just 1,000 times better. Or, Suikoden, the Konami stuff. Like, fair. I have Suikoden 1 through 3 on my PS3, but I never beat them. I played them. I tried them. I beat Final Fantasy 7. I beat Final Fantasy 10. Oh, no, not 10. I almost beat Final Fantasy 10. I beat Final Fantasy 5. Those actually kept me in long enough. And I get what people are saying. Like, I there are things that are definitely different about other JRPGs. Like the Tales series has its own kind of charm to it. Even though I'll argue that half of that charm is just taking the menu system of Final Fantasy and putting everything backwards so you don't know where everything is. But anyway, other series.
Tales is like action combat.
It is. It's definitely different from how Final Fantasy is. But
I'm trying to think of the name of it. It's got like a specific name. LMBS. Linear Motion Battle System. That's what it's called. All right, I remembered. Go on.
I never knew that had a distinction. But I mean, anyway, I don't even remember what the plot of what I was going to say was. Just I feel, oh no, actually, what I was going to say was other people just say, other series are better. But like, it's just, are you being contrarian, or have I just not experienced these games enough to agree?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll tell you, I have not actually played Dragon Quest. I plan on it. I plan on it. Yeah, the other like really big old school RPG series that I've played is Shin Megami Tensei.
Oh yeah, you're big into those.
And like, I mean, I love them both. But they're I don't know, they're very different. I think they're too different to compare.
I can see that. Yeah, Shin Megami Tensei in general is a lot more about, and I haven't even played them, but it seems to be a lot more about happenings, story. Like, I feel like there's a little bit more story focus to it.
Yeah, totally.
But that's another subject for a different day. So Final Fantasy IX is I mean, how did the combat play? I know nothing about the game. It was the game. It didn't go to a materia system. It didn't. It didn't have the
It's
Final
just like
Fantasy.
6.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You did say that. It was just like six,
Yeah.
where it's kind of just like you have dedicated characters and you go along with them.
Yep.
So they were. Yeah. Okay. I guess my idea was kind of correct then, where it's just, what if we just took classic Final Fantasy and made it like this new all the shit we learned with these other games.
Yeah, yeah. Like the kind of new thing that they introduced that 6 didn't have is the trance system, which is kind of like limit breaks from 7,
Hmm.
but instead of actually doing a limit break, it's like the character just enters a trance state where they're super powerful for a little bit, you know? But because of the ATB system and how fucking long everything takes, they really are only tranced for like one turn, so I don't know, it doesn't really matter.
So it's kind of like a limit break anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It
Yeah.
ends up being just like a limit break.
I liked
Um,
the limit break system. Did
oh,
six
it's
have
great.
that?
6 did not have limits. No,
I
I
didn't.
don't.
I didn't think it did either. But you are right. A
Yeah.
lot of them were mostly just about dealing damage. Where there'd be the off character like Kate Sith, who will have some status afflictions, but I don't know anyone who brought Kate Sith to endgame.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. He's really good in the speed run.
Or
But actually most people speed run the game with most people speed run a category that bans Kate Sith. Not Kate Sith entirely, but he has one limit break that can hit kill anything. And so the most popular speedrun category doesn't use that particular move anyway.
is it still glitchless? I assume.
Well, no. There's some glitches that they use in it. Like you can skip Cosmo Canyon entirely if you do. You can drive right past it if you do the right kind of thing. It's like the setup for it is so complicated though
Oh,
that
okay.
like yeah, it's crazy. And there's some other really weird little glitches too. Like there is a bug that involves using Mug as Vincent when he's holding a certain kind of weapon.
Huh.
Like so this is only used in the 100% run because otherwise you wouldn't have Vincent, but
Yeah.
but you can it's there I'm going to get the precise details wrong, but the gist of it is you can use Vincent's Mug to skip the next attack animation, but it
Oh.
still goes through. So you can queue up a Knights of the Round and do Knights of the Round damage in an instant without the
Oh.
game doing any animation
So
for it.
that thing I've wanted the entire time I owned Knights of the Round.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's cool. I mean, so okay, this is kind of a off subject a little bit, but speed running is something I don't know if I probably talked about it here before, but speed running. The first time I ever saw it was Pokemon, because Pokemon was my life as a kid. And I just saw a video on, God, it had to be Facebook, I guess, way back in the day, where it's like, this man beat Pokemon in 5 minutes. And I watched him. I watched that video, and I watched him just no clip through the entire fucking world. And it was just like, that he just went to right to the end, beat the game in 5 minutes. I was like, I hate speedrunning and everything it stands for. This pisses me off. Why are people impressed by this? I was just mad because it was nothing but exploits. But then, of course, once I became a Twitch streamer and started getting into some other communities who do speedruns, I know there's not, there's glitchless runs as well. And there's people who do the game how it's like mechanically as best as it can be presented to you, and just they actually speedrun it, and that's impressive to me.
Yeah.
But glitch runs, I've never got glitch runs other than the fact that you get to say, oh, I beat this long game in a really short amount of time.
Yeah, right. Like glitch runs definitely have a little bit of a place because it's like, well, if it's the fastest run, then there's something to be said about it's the fastest run, you know?
Yeah.
Like yeah, like I remember when the Demon Souls remake came out, I was watching Distortion speed run it, and there was this new glitch that was found to be able to basically warp to the end of every world. And Demon Souls has 5 worlds where there's like a linear set of levels that gets to the end, but you could just wrong warp to the last boss's arena of every world sequentially. And when you did that, the boss's AI didn't load in because you didn't come through the fog gate. So you would
Oh,
just go in there and just beat him to
one
death and then
shot.
wrong warp to the next one and beat him to
Yeah.
death. And someone asked him, like, why are you even doing this? And he's like, to get the fastest completion of Demon Souls ever because it was brand new, right? It was brand new. This discussion was found out. So it's like, you know, this isn't going to be a competitive category because everyone's going to get sick of it right away. But right now, for the time being, with this being a brand new discovery, we can beat this game faster than ever,
Listen, man,
And
this is
there's something to be said about that.
yeah, but this is QA department work. This isn't like impressive to me. This is something that, hey, I beat your game in 5 minutes on week 1. Okay, what did we fuck up? Patch comes out day 2. All right, well, now
Sure.
try that, you fucker.
Totally. So for the time being, once or twice, there's a curiosity there that's like, how fast can it go? Okay, I've seen it, don't want to see it again. All right, you know.
So that
Uh,
what you just said, really important. Okay, I've seen it, don't want to see it again. That's where I am for basically every glitch run. It's just like
yeah,
I'm just not okay. Speedrunning itself. Once I understood that there's like a whole community of speedrunners who do just different kinds of runs, and it's just like, okay, well, without exploiting the game, how fast can you actually? That because that to me that's really how you get there. Okay, I
mhm.
guess I'm sounding like a little bit of a little bit of a game boomer at this point, but like I just want to see something that impresses me. If you just no clip through the entire game, fight bosses that won't even fight back, then I'm just like, dude, this is impressive to the developers and then like 5
Sure.
people. That in my perception, my head, that's the impression I get from that. It's like this
Yeah.
is it's just boring to me. It's not even boring. It's actively frustrating because I'm just like, this shouldn't be doable.
Yeah, as a spectator, I mostly agree with you that yeah, those runs are generally not super interesting to watch. What you got to remember though is that part of your issue is that the game seems too easy because they're just breaking it so badly that there's no skill
Mm.
involved anymore and it's not impressive.
Hmm.
But remember, they're racing against other people who are also doing that. It's not just about beating the game, it's about beating the other guy. It's about doing this fucked up strategy better than anyone else? And so there's something to be said about that.
I think
It's
it's
like
just
speed.
I think it's just my personality type where I think okay, so I'm the person who found out in Warhammer Online: The Age of Reckoning that it was entirely possible. Well, I didn't find this out, but I found out that this is a game where you can play as a tank class, a character typically relegated to PvE because you need the mobs to be on someone who can take a punch. I found out that PvP tanks were a deal in Warhammer Online because for enemy models, like enemies, other players, there is collision detection. So if you wanted to, you could actually hold a bridge as a choke point with 2 tanks just standing there with tower shields. You could do that. And so I found out very quickly that in World of Warcraft and Warhammer Online Age of Reckoning, that if you actually went for tank gear and you became unkillable, the most fun you could have is fucking with other people. So when I think of like ways to break a game and ways that will be fun that people don't typically think of, I just have no fun if I'm beating an AI that was only programmed to act in a certain way, or beating a level that was programmed to beat a certain way, only because I found a simple little thing. And just because other people are doing the same thing, it's just it goes back to the fact that I find no satisfaction or interest at all in that I'm not impressed at all by anyone else doing
Yeah.
it.
Well, totally. I mean, and I'm in the same boat most of the time, where like I want to watch runs that minimize glitches, and I want to, if I'm gonna run a game, I'm probably gonna run those categories
Yeah.
myself. I'm just giving you that perspective though, that
Oh, for
like,
sure.
it's about the competition. That's why like any game can be fun to speed run. almost, because, it makes it no longer about how challenging the game is, but
Yes.
more about how much better you can be versus other people.
And okay, so yes, but like I didn't get okay, so the reason I got into this one streamer I followed was because they're a speedrunner and they basically showed me, oh yeah, this guy did, okay, for reference, this guy Sin_stream, he played Castlevania, the first game, and he's a speedrunner. That's all he does. So he speedruns games, and I was sitting here having the most awful time on Frankenstein's monster, like the third boss of the game, and I watch him go in there and just not even get hit and just fucking wiped the fucking floor with the game essentially. He says, yeah, man, this is my relaxation game. I speedrun this just to chill. And I'm just like, what? Because Castlevania, hard game. That's all I know. And then I watched him and I studied him and I was like, oh my God. So speedrunning is much less about like just being a shithead who can exploit glitches and much more like finding ways to play a game that never existed or was intended by the original creators and making a game, like a meta game in itself, to compete against, yes, other people, but like, how do you, it's less for me about competing against other people for time and way more about you just changed the entire point of the game. So you just went through and like not broke the game, but used the game in a way that it was never meant to get through it better than no one else can. And that to me was what was interesting. It's like, so all right, key example. All right, this level has bats in it. Therefore, and I have to be on a level up here where I need to be like higher up on the screen in order to progress. I have to go forward and then back, and then that's how you get to the next part of the screen. Simon Belmont can get hit, and because there's knockback in Castlevania, depending on how you get hit by that bat, it can send you up and you can land on a platform above you, saving you like a whole minute's worth of time. And I thought that was
the old damage boost.
Yeah, exactly. And you, in a game where you have a health bar and everything hurts you way too much, getting hurt is never something you want to do until you realize, oh, what if I just change the plot a little bit? What if I say, why don't I just go over here, get hit, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how low my health is in this entire level, because at this point, I know exactly when and how I'm going to get more health, or I'm just going to go to the next level and have more health anyway. So it's like, oh my God, you redefine a video game. You redefine a video game in a way that doesn't ruin it. You don't ruin the story. You're not fucking anything up. You're just playing it in a way that gives you way more replay value than was ever thought to have. So that's cool. That's my little tidbit on speedrunning.
I love retro speedrunning.
Yeah.
I've had a little bit of a hankering to get back into it, but I'm not ready to pull the trigger on it yet. But we'll see. But all right, so that was our discussion on Final Fantasies 1 through 9. I guess stay tuned for. I'm going to talk about 10 and 10 too next week.
I think I'm just going to leave it on that because I could talk about a couple games that I've been playing, but I feel like there's enough to talk about with 10 and 10 too that we may possibly span another episode for 18.
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, I appreciate you all hanging out. We're on. Damn, this one went 2 hours 37 minutes so far.
Yeah.
I figure we might go a little bit long explaining the context of Final Fantasy. I mean, I think with our theme of our show,
it's my huge struggle with doing this podcast. Yeah, is it's like, okay, I want to talk about this game, but I've been building up to this game for 3 years, and I need to tell you guys the story.
Yeah, it's just like there's with the theme of our show. I feel like we nitpicked each game enough. All right, well, guys, I guess tune in next week when we have our 10 and 10 2 discussion plus other, if that happens. You can find me on YouTube, Twitter, everywhere on the fucking internet as Invictus Knox, and Mr. Dash Retro can be found on Twitter and Twitch. You're live 3 days a week, aren't you?
4 days a week
Oh,
usually.
4 days. Okay, I do 3 days a week. So we're both on Twitch. Catch us whenever our schedules say to catch us, and give us follows everywhere. See you later, guys.
See ya.
Peace out.